Good day, social media world, and welcome to our live stream here at Patriot Freedom Project and now Weaponization Watch. We're very glad to have you here with us. 5 years ago, I would have never imagined that my life would have become uh, about advocacy, fighting for Americans in this country who have been victims of weaponization of government. We watched a fake, what I like to call uh, Fed napping in Michigan, which was the build up to what we saw take place on that fateful day on January 6th, 2021. And what did we learn from all of that? Well, we learned that weaponization runs very, very deep in government, and I feel also that we were blinded to it. And our great president Donald Trump has removed those blinders, and we have now seen just how bad weaponization is and what it can do to people's lives. What I've watched over these past 4 years is nothing short of a humanitarian crisis. I've seen a lot of suffering. I've seen broken families. I've seen broken men and women. I've seen people lose their life career, their life savings. I've seen people, threatened with lifetime in prison, 20, 22 years in prison, like Enrique Tarrio. Um, my own family was victimized in this, in this takedown of President Trump, where they used Trump supporters to take this president out. And it didn't work because Trump supporters always show up. They stick by him. They're loyal to him. And they have proven that since. We're very grateful to President Trump. We want to thank him. 1 year ago, we got a historic moment in time where he did a mass pardon, and everybody got to leave prison that night and walk out of a very, very bad situation, reunite with their families. We are still waiting for 12 more pardons. We haven't seen those pardons come yet. There's still 12 Sixers that have not gotten their pardon. We're hoping that President Trump issues those pardons very, very soon. We know that there's a lot of discussion going on, and we're very grateful for President Trump's consideration. These men, they deserve their pardons. They deserve to be completely free of this nightmare and to continue their life the way the others have. And so we hope that President Trump sees this and hears this, and does the right thing here and gives these men their pardons. They are long overdue. So what do we do now? We continue to shine a bright light on weaponization. J6 is just what opened Pandora's box for us. We are now, through Weaponization Watch, going to, focus on deep weaponization, where we see very, very corrupt cases out of districts like the Eastern District of New York, where they are housing women and men in jail on bogus conspiracy charges. We're working with very significant and profound lawyers to shine a bright light there. People need to understand just how deep and corrupt weaponization can be and how deep and corrupt it actually is. You're going to hear from some very, very profound lawyers today. They're going to share with you legalities about weaponization and just how a bogus conspiracy can be. Conspiracy is a very dangerous charge. Conspiracy comes up when government doesn't have anything to stick. So everything is conspiracy to commit a thought crime. And there's a lot of people in this country who are suffering from thought crimes, and they're languishing behind bars. And we're going to talk more about that as the day goes on. You're going to hear more about that. But for right now, we need to focus on January 6th. We need to tell you, 4 years later, what have we learned? Where are they now? You're going to hear from J6ers today. And not just here, you're going to hear from J6ers, probably around town here in DC. And we're hoping that friendly and positive media is shedding a light on the massacre, as I'd like to put it, of these families, of these men and these women. These men and these women came to DC on January 6, 2021 to support their commander in chief. They loved their president and they wanted to be here for him. And because of that, their lives were upended. Families were torn apart, children were affected, homes were raided, and the list is long. And where are they now? Well, you need to find out and hear from them. And you need to also continue to support these families, continue to support these Sixers. Jobs have been lost, marriages are broken, bank accounts are drained, life savings are lost, careers are gone. And we need to continue supporting these men and women, and we need to continue to help them. So we hope you'll stick around and stay with us today throughout our live stream. And we're very, very happy to have you here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am John Schlafly, here representing Phyllis Schlafly Eagles and the foundation called Eagle Forum Education and Legal, which celebrated its 150th birthday. Now, our nation is about to mark its 250th birthday. So that's right. For the first almost 100 years of our country, there was no Department of Justice. The Attorney General during that time was a part-time lawyer who accepted other clients to make ends meet. And how did we get by for almost 100 years without a Department of Justice? Well, it's because there were no federal crimes, literally no federal crimes, until about 150 years ago. Now, how did that happen? It's history that should be familiar to all Americans, but just in a brief nutshell, as the Civil War was drawing to a close, President Lincoln promised to bind up the nation's wounds with malice toward none and charity for all. But his successors had a very different view. They insisted that the defeated states would not be readmitted until they were reconstructed. So we entered upon a period of reconstruction in which Congress, completely controlled by the victorious Union Army, passed the first federal criminal laws, including the first conspiracy laws, one called Conspiracy Against Rights, and created the Department of Justice to enforce those laws and authorized the federal district courts for the first time to hear those cases for the first time in our history. Now, historians say that Reconstruction ended 12 years later when the Republicans and Democrats agreed to settle the disputed presidential election of 1876. But those new criminal laws remained on the books, the Department of Justice remained, and the federal courts remained with the power that they had been given. And so even after all those years, the Department of Justice metastasized and those laws were repurposed. For example, our friend Douglas Mackey, who we'll hear from later in this program, was accused of conspiracy against rights for sharing a tweet written by somebody else on his Twitter feed. He was sentenced to 7 months in prison for that. As another example, President Trump himself was charged with conspiracy against rights for, in effect, endorsing, promoting, and conspiring to break a window at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, 5 years ago today. And the many defendants who were arrested, charged, and incarcerated were accused of similar crimes, which were originally passed for the purpose of stamping out the Ku Klux Klan after the Civil War, but have been repurposed by ambitious and aggressive and bright attorneys inside the Department of Justice. So we think in Weaponization Watch that much of those efforts were misguided, and while we certainly deeply appreciate the decision of the Justice Department to drop the charges against President Trump and President Trump's pardon of the 1,500 or so defendants who were accused wrongly of the crime of conspiracy in many cases. We think there's more work to be done because we've learned that there are many, many hundreds, if not thousands, of other cases in which the judicial system under the Department of Justice has been abused. We're hoping to see fundamental reform of the Department of Justice, of the laws that authorize bringing nebulous conspiracy charges. Conspiracy is the all-purpose remedy of many ambitious lawyers in the Justice Department because ordinary juries do not understand what a conspiracy is, what it means, and they don't understand that conspiracy charges carry much more severe penalties than the underlying charges would be. So we've got a number of great experts who are going to be with us today to explain the ins and outs of what went wrong with our justice system over the last 150 years and the federal penal system, and to seek a fundamental remedy that starts with the January 6 defendants but doesn't stop there and goes on to other unrelated cases in which the Justice Department has been weaponized against American citizens. Thank you all for joining us here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing what many of our upcoming experts have to say about this important subject. Thank you.
January 6th defendants are having their lives totally destroyed and being treated worse than terrorists and murderers. It's an injustice. There's never been anything like it, in my opinion, in the history of our country. And we're going to have to do something about it, and we will do something. So Paul and Cynthia and everybody, and I say hostages because that's what you're hostages. What happened here is an injustice, and it should never be allowed to happen again. America will be stronger and greater than ever before. And you know, tonight I'm going to be signing on the J6 hostages pardons to get them out. So this is January 6th. These are the hostages, approximately 1,500 for a pardon. Full pardon.
All right, everyone, welcome. It is the 5th anniversary of January 6th, and a horrible day in the history of patriotic citizens in America. And so much of that day has still not been adjudicated, certainly not to the length and the measure that God-fearing, patriotic, Constitution-loving Americans demand. And so we're here with a couple of men who were there that day, whose lives were turned absolutely upside down, who had to face the full onslaught and weight of a tyrannical government, who, show me the man, I'll show you the crime, turned their lives absolutely inside out. Justice was not on their side. Will Pope, Tim Hale, Jordan Meek. What's your lives been like this last 5 years? And how do you feel about where the government is now in prosecuting those who went after you, a literal manhunt for patriotic Americans?
Yeah, I think all three of us, we were arrested fairly early on in 2021. So we had a long, you were arrested in 2021, right? You were in, yep. So, it was a long 4 years under the Biden administration that we had to endure. That was psychologically tough, financially tough. We were fighting the United States of America in court. The full power of the government had been weaponized against Americans like us. And I was entirely peaceful, yet facing 30 years in prison for being there that day. And, it was a novel prosecution that they brought. The Supreme Court found that they wrongfully applied felony charges against us. And we had to fight. We had to defend the Constitution. We had to keep going. And you really find out, what you're made of when you're put through things like that.
Tremendously. There was also this idea that government was staging things. They were literally creating and setting citizens up. Tim, you experienced some of that. What has your life been like in the wake of?
Well, I mean, like everyone else, devastated financially, name dragged through the mud. The Mockingbird media has worked hand in hand with the federal government in not only sabotaging the country, but making our lives hell. But yeah, in terms of setting this up, the real fight now, and all these years since my release from prison, is getting the truth out about the fact that the United States government was 100% involved in staging January 6th. It was a psyop. It was a false flag. It was a color revolution. And unfortunately, despite everything we're grateful for from President Trump, we're still fighting the U.S. government to get the truth out, and it's not coming. That's really, I think, the biggest slap in the face is that after the time that we've served, or the time of our lives, it's been stolen, in spite of our loyalty and in spite of our sacrifice as citizens, we still haven't been rewarded with the most important thing. It's not restitution, though that matters. The most important thing is the truth, and we still don't have it. And that's un-American.
Jordan, we're 5 years later, and you hear a lot of people who just want to get on, see all the great things that are happening, which, to your point, Tim, there's good things happening. How do you feel when people say that? I mean, they went after you, destroyed your life, destroyed your future potential. I mean, your name, this January 6th stays with you for the rest of your life. What do you think when people are saying it's time to move on?
We still have to fight, but not forget. We still got a lot of work to do, and we have the right people. Cynthia Hughes fighting for us, and I mean, they tore our lives apart, but we can't let that keep us down. So I got out. I went straight to work, started investing, because I pray to God that the government comes through it, but they ruined our lives, so I'm not going to expect them to save it.
Your father, what is it like for your family, for your children to watch you go through this?
It was definitely quite the experience. I mean, solitary confinement, but even though that was kind of the worst, the not being able to see them for 2 years, not allowed. You know what I mean? Happened to see my son lose his baby teeth and grow his baby boy teeth through pinchers. It's traumatic, but I believe in God and I have strong faith, and he brought me back home.
One thing I think about what you're saying, that, government created the problem, so looking to government to be the solution isn't a great idea. What suggestions do you guys have for the experiences you have gained so much knowledge about the judicial system, how it works, how politicians work? What do you think is the solution for true justice as it pertains to when our government did?
Yeah, unfortunately, when you learn how most politicians work, you learn that they don't work. And we are still looking for accountability. We're waiting for accountability. And if you don't get that accountability when the government is weaponized against the people like that, then eventually it's going to come back. It's going to get much worse. Like, President Trump is not the end of the problem here. He's got a limited amount of time. And if the problem doesn't get corrected, it will come back and it will be much, much worse. And it will go after a lot of other people out there who don't think the government would ever come after them. But the government will find a way to crush their lives because of whatever political or ideological position they take in life, or just because the government wants to flex and wants to intimidate and wants to do shock and awe tactics to change the behavior of the entire society like they did to us. They wanted to use shock and awe and intimidate to try to crush dissent here in America. And we can't have that. We have a constitution that enshrines our freedom of speech, our freedom of the press, our First Amendment rights. But along the way, we also learned that a lot of our other rights are very important. A lot of the rights you don't normally think about, your Fourth Amendment, your Fifth Amendment, your Sixth Amendment, which you may never fully use unless you have to go through a legal battle like we did. Right. And those are very important. And we found out that oftentimes the American people aren't looking when the government tries to take those rights away from you, to violate your constitutional rights. And really, I've always believed that January 6th defendants were standing on the front lines of a battle to defend the Constitution. And had we not pushed back, there would have been a lot of our civil liberties that were lost during that period of time. But you have to resist when there's weaponized tyranny coming after your Constitution.
Hey, Tim, that really takes me to this idea of people. A lot of people just took pleas. They wanted it to be done with. They need to get back to their lives. People have to live with the decisions that they make. Why was it so important for you to not take a plea, to see the full process play out? And how has that affected you now in the aftermath? Your credibility, your ability to speak on these things with authority. What did that mean to you? Why did you choose that instead of taking a plea?
I can't criticize anyone else's decision. I had the luxury of not having a wife or kids. So I mean, my reason is the same message that I have to President Trump, which is that the truth is the most important thing. I'm willing to fall on a sword for it. There's nothing I would give more as a citizen than my life, and I was willing to sacrifice all of it. And he's right. It doesn't just end with President Trump. This has been going on for years. You go back to the Whitmer thing, but even going back decades before, we had the church committee hearings where they reveal a whole lot about operations our government's involved in. That's kind of what I would recommend. It's just like first thought. Obviously, we're never always going to get to the truth through committee. It's an imperfect system. Frankly, it's a corrupt system. But I'm here. I'm powerless. The only thing we have is our voices. I want the truth. And again, I'm grateful to President Trump, but I would say, President Trump, you're in office right now. You have a unitary authority. You have plenary power. I would order every single one of these three-letter agencies to audit every officer or federal informant or asset they had deployed there that day and release it to the public, regardless of any reputational damage it might do to the feds. If it causes that much reputation, they deserve it and they shouldn't exist. We deserve the truth more than anything. And President Trump was a victim of this as well. And I believe that President Trump is absolutely within his right to cast these vipers out. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. Jordan, anything you would say to President Trump?
Just keep fighting the good fight for us, not the others. That's it.
Well, close us out today.
Yeah, the Bible talks about Esther being in a time in history, a time and place where she had an opportunity to do something that could change the flow of history. And like Tim said, President Trump is in a moment in time where he has an opportunity to change history. And I think in a smaller way, we all do. We can all shape the world around us in a better way. And we're trying to. But President Trump, he does have authority. He's been vested with the power by the people. And a lot can be done that is good in our country with that power. On Inauguration Day, he signed an executive order on the weaponization of government. In that executive order, he ordered the Attorney General to bring accountability to that past misconduct. And he named the January 6th political prisoners in that executive order. But we're still waiting for that accountability. And he also said that the Attorney General needs to recommend remedial actions for the victims of that weaponization. And we're still waiting for that too. So already a year has passed in President Trump's term. I know a lot of people are saying we've got 3 years left. But on the political clock, time flies by very fast. You got midterms coming up. And if we get too far down the road, the weaponization of government will never be checked, will never be corrected. And we have to send a message that this can never be allowed to happen to Americans again.
Absolutely. Well, that lands at the feet of Attorney General Pam Bondi and Attorney Todd Blanche to make those moves and do the right thing by the American people. Thank you for being here, for hearing this message today. It's important that we never be quiet and we do not go quietly into the dark in all of our lives, because one day the government will be knocking on your door.
I had the great honor of representing a J6 defendant. His name was President Donald Trump. He had the same courage, he had the same strength, he had the same faith as everyone in this room, and I saw it firsthand. When he hired me, we were looking at 4 criminal cases, thanks to the oppressiveness of Joe Biden and his corrupt actors in his corrupt Department of Justice. I represented President Trump in the Washington, D.C. case, where, as you may know, they attempted to characterize him as an insurrectionist, as someone who hated the Constitution, as someone, you may have heard those same sentiments against the people in this room. And we knew it was false, and we knew they were lying, and we also knew that we would overcome. Because no amount of oppression can ever defeat faith and courage and prayer. And this room is a living testament to that. That picture of President Trump has special significance for me because we were in New Jersey looking at 4 cases, and we got word that this prosecutor in Atlanta, persecuted, wanted to take his mugshot. And the FBI and the CIA and the Secret Service, they have the president's picture. There was no reason for him to have his mugshot, but this persecutor, and you may have experienced persecutors, I don't know in your experience, but this persecutor wanted him to come down to Atlanta. And we were begging her, we don't want you to do that, there's no reason. And finally the president said, I've had enough. I'm gonna go down there and I'm gonna take a picture. And all the nerdy lawyers, myself included, oh, you can't do that, Mr. President. You know, it's the President of the United States. I'm going to do it. And he went down there and he took that photograph. It's iconic. It's beautiful. Most beautiful photograph I've ever seen. And he called me up the next day. He said, what'd you think of it? I said, it's pretty powerful. He said, John, it's going to be more famous than Sinatra's headshot. He was right, because that man was able to take a negative and turn it into a positive, and turn it into a representation of a single man fighting oppression and fighting for our country, which is exactly what you've been doing over the last 5 years. I will say he was with you every step of the way in my conversations with him. He stood side by side with you all. No one can possibly understand what it means to go through the criminal justice system unless you've lived it. No one can understand the fear of separation, the fear of loneliness, the effect on families, the effect of children, the destructiveness of it all. And for what? Because one man, Joe Biden, wanted to crush a movement? Crush a political movement. We have to connect the dots. It started in 2016. It started with Obama spying on Trump's campaign. It went to Russiagate, that fake narrative. It went through the impeachment process. It went right through J6, which was a total setup and an outrage. I saw the photographs. Let me say, I didn't know much about J6 when I got involved. I don't know why the president hired me. I'm just a lawyer from New York City, and I don't work for a big firm. No big firm would take on the case, by the way. No one would do that. So I'm very grateful he did. It was the best thing I've ever done as a lawyer, because I believe being a lawyer is fighting for justice, not using the legal system to oppress and crush people. And that's what Biden did, and that's what your prosecutors were doing. No question about it. But you got to connect the dots. And the dots were focused on one objective by Joe Biden and his corrupt minions, and that was to crush a political movement, a ground roots political movement that sought the best in America. And Joe Biden wanted to crush that from the very top to the very bottom. It didn't matter. And anybody that got in the way would be destroyed. I saw it firsthand. I also felt the oppressiveness of walking into a courtroom in the District of Columbia and what that felt like as an American citizen. The heaviness, the weight. They were there for one reason: to get us, to put us in jail, and to crush us. They thought they could do that. You had these lawyers, many of them Ivy League trained lawyers, former Department of Justice lawyers, in the Department of Justice lawyers. Some of them, I hate to say it, had been colleagues of mine. They had one purpose and one purpose alone: to destroy American citizens that they disagreed with. That was their objective. And you've lived it firsthand. And you've seen it. And it's incredible. And thanks to people like Cynthia, candidly, thank you. Because without you, no, in every dark moment in American history, there's been a beacon of light. And you were that beacon of light. And without your courage and strength, we wouldn't all be here. And the courage and strength of other patriots. Our work is not over. Our mission is not completed. The fight has just begun. They're already talking about coming after us if they win in the next election cycle. Can you believe that? They haven't had enough. They want more.
You're not going to let them, John.
Nobody is. Nobody in this room is going to let them. Absolutely not. We know what their goal is, but we're going to win because our cause is righteous, and our cause is just, and our cause is ordained. All they have is power and the lust for power, and we will defeat that. But our mission is not completed. I also work for an exoneration project in Kansas City. I know firsthand that getting out of jail is just the first step. We have to deal with issues of reintegration, of jobs, of getting licenses back, rebuilding families, rebuilding lives, and that takes a lot of work. And I know, Cynthia, you are dedicated to that, and everybody in this room is dedicated to that. We also have to hold those who oppressed us accountable. I'm sorry. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, but there has to be justice. Those agents who cruelly put you in leg irons for no reason at all, who kept you in jail for months and years without due process, who cruelly attacked the very foundation of humanness, American citizens, they have to be held accountable. But not just those on the front lines. The ones who met secretly in the White House, putting it all together, constructing the narrative, organizing the troops behind the scenes. The ones who are at the center of this oppression must be held accountable as well. And I have every reason to believe that the Department of Justice now, in the hands of folks like Ed Martin, and Attorney General Bondi and the President of the United States, will make sure that that happens. We don't seek vengeance, we seek justice. Justice for all, including everybody in this room. And finally, we can't be complacent. We can't give up. We can't stop now. The fight is just beginning. We have to make sure that our voices are heard. And most importantly, we have to make sure that the guarantees of the Constitution, due process, the right to counsel, The right to fair hearing is preserved because it was denied to all of us every step of the way, and that should never, ever, ever happen again in America. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Smith. I'm a lawyer
who challenged the government's use of certain criminal statutes in the January 6 cases. John Schlafly very eloquently referred to the government's use and abuse of some of these statutes earlier. But I'd like to ask you to imagine a scenario, if you will. Suppose protests break out all over the country relating to politics. Thousands of individuals go to the nearest national park. They flood the streets. Some of them engage in vandalism. There's some destruction of property, but the overwhelming majority of them do not destroy property. The overwhelming majority of them engage in nonviolent protest. But imagine that this is the federal government's reaction to the protests. Over 1,500 protesters are arrested, even those who didn't engage in violence. They're arrested from their homes in the middle of the night at gunpoint by FBI SWAT teams for misdemeanor offenses. That is, including offenses including trespass and other nonviolent crimes. Imagine that in response to these protests, the federal government got extremely creative with its use of very old statutes, including some of the Civil War statutes that John Schlafly was referring to earlier. And imagine the federal government said, well, even though obstruction of justice usually involves tampering with evidence or interfering with investigations, we're going to throw all of that out the window and prosecute nonviolent protesters for obstruction of justice for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Imagine prosecutors throughout hundreds of years of court understandings of what obstruction of justice meant. Imagine that all of the judges who are presiding over these thousands of cases went along with that argument, which in ordinary times, law professors in the legal community would scoff at. Imagine in response to these protests, some individuals are charged with assault and face up to 20 years or more in prison for doing such things as touching signs that they're not supposed to touch, and carrying signs over their heads that later crashed to the floor without any injury to police officers. Imagine the federal government was using the most intense sentencing enhancements in the book, such as a terrorism enhancement, to put the nonviolent protesters in prison for years or even decades. Imagine that the place where these protesters were prosecuted by the federal government was politically biased against them to the extent that 95% or more of the jury pool probably couldn't be impartial about presiding over their criminal cases. Imagine at the sentencing hearings of these defendants, the prosecutors encouraged judges to add time to the sentence for political statements that the protesters were making. Not statements that encourage other people to commit crimes, not racist statements. Just imagine that the prosecutors were highlighting the political leanings of the defendant in order to get higher sentences. Imagine that if in this scenario, the judges were calling the defendants traitors and treasonous and seditionists, even though those defendants had never been charged with those crimes. Imagine the judges were just assuming that was the case in court and punishing them accordingly. Imagine that evidence in a criminal trial in these cases included video clips of political debates between individuals running for the office of the presidency. That was evidence in a criminal trial. Imagine that world. So when we think about January 6th and as of political overtones, I think a lot of people don't really look at it from a criminal justice angle.
They just think about it in terms of the politics. Are they for this politician or are they against him? And what gets lost is the objective facts of how these cases were prosecuted. It's almost not even considered at all. It's a secondary consideration. And I think it's essential when we talk about January 6th and its legacy to try to strip all of that political layer off the cases when we think about whether we want this to happen again. Do we want our prosecutors to be throwing nonviolent protesters in prison for things like trespass? Do we want prosecutors to be creatively interpreting statutes in ways that have never been done before in order to put nonviolent protesters in prison for decades? Do we want our judges to be referring to people as criminals for crimes they're not even charged with in court? And I think the obvious answer for any reasonable person is, of course, we don't want this to happen. So the question becomes, why did it happen? How could so many people in this system make mistakes like this? How could so many judges and prosecutors do things they don't normally do? Because what we saw on the January 6 prosecutions was a moral panic. There have been episodes like this in American history before. Another example is when parents of children in the Midwest were accused of acting like demons and abusing their children for years and years and years. And a conspiracy theory turned into a basis for investigating parents. It's now well known that this phenomenon of prosecutions that broke out in the 1980s was a moral panic, but we didn't really consider it that at the time. So to me, as someone who was deeply involved in these cases and bringing and challenging some of these statutes up to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, the overwhelming lesson of January 6th is to keep politics out of criminal justice. It has to be removed. We can't have prosecutors deciding who to charge based on their political leanings. We can't have prosecutors looking through social media feeds of potential targets for investigations and deciding to charge based on the content of their speech, based on their political beliefs. And if you think that this is an exaggeration, that this is not what they did, you would be mistaken. It is all over the trial transcripts. Pull them, look at them. You will see prosecutors talking about speech of defendants over and over and over again. Sentencing hearings turned into struggle sessions, where if the defendants did not agree to eat their words, to go back on their support for a political candidate, the idea was the judge would punish them more. It's not American. It should never happen again. And we just have to try to think about this event and these prosecutions without the political overtones on top of them. That's my take home from January 6th.
So it's amazing that I'm sitting in this building today, and I'm here for Weaponization Watch. Because the extreme weaponization, for me, started in this very room. It was in 2018. The founder of the Proud Boys, Gavin McInnes, gave a speech here. It was more of a comedy skit than a speech. And walking out those doors, NYPD had allowed the attendees to leave and left the Proud Boys back, including Gavin. Outside, there was a major protest. Antifa and BLM were outside throwing glass bottles of urine at the attendees. If any of you know my guys don't put up with that. And I think that's the reason why NYPD held them back. We don't let people get assaulted. We don't let people assault us. So peacefully, NYPD, my guys walked out after NYPD let them. They were walking to their cars, and they were followed, and they kept trying to get away from these people that were following them. Well, it resulted in one of those bottles of urine being thrown at one of my guys. the reprisal and the self-defense was immediate. Police came, asked the first party, which was the Proud Boys, "Are you guys okay?" "Yeah, thank you for asking." They asked a member of Antifa that threw the urine bottle, which was on the floor, if he was okay. And he said, "F off, pigs." He left. That was during the peak of the 2018 midterm election when we were, jobs, not mobs, were trending because our jobs number were through the roof and Antifa and BLM were mobbing the streets. The Governor Cuomo came up and decided to make a PR campaign against mobs, not jobs, and arrest 9 individuals for defending themselves. He didn't focus on anybody else. These gentlemen, these brave men, took it to trial here in New York City. The prosecutor's office and law enforcement did not know who these victims are. They never identified these victims because the victims disappeared. They went through trial with a jury not of their peers, and they were sentenced to 4 years in prison for defending themselves. I want to take a time machine to September 9th of 2016, where all of this started. Hillary Clinton called us, everybody in this room, a basket of deplorables. And although we took it for ourselves, and we put it on t-shirts, we put it on hats, they meant it. They believed that we were deplorable human beings. After that, they started silencing us on social media because they lost an election. They're like, well, we gotta quiet these people down. Well, that didn't work. Then they went for financial platforms, PayPal, Cash App. That didn't work because we're not here for the money. Matter of fact, if you're in this business, people call people grifters all the time. If you're in this business, this isn't a business, okay? You could probably make more money in an office job. We do this for passion. So when they took us off financial platforms, they saw that didn't work because it wasn't about money for us. Then in 2019, what did they do? They locked us in our homes. They shut our businesses down. They said to keep away, 6 foot distancing. We couldn't see our loved ones that went to the hospital. Some of them passed away and we never got to see them again. That didn't work. We had reopen campaigns across the country. Florida was one of the first states to reopen completely, successfully. Then they allowed riots and mayhem to hit the streets in the summer of love of 2020. That's what they called it. You guys remember fiery but peaceful? As the buildings burned behind them, they allowed that to happen. None of that worked. So what did they have to do? The ultimate way to silence the American people. They stole an election. And then they have the audacity to say that the reason that people went into the Capitol was because President Trump was lying about the election and pointed him there. I didn't go to D.C. because President Trump pointed me there. I was going to D.C. because of everything that happened before that. Deplorable, broke, silenced, our businesses destroyed. I didn't get to see my uncle when he passed away because of COVID. And then that didn't work. So what did they do? They put us in chains. I did 3 years in solitary confinement. And I don't even think that's the ultimate goal. When the president decided to get up and run again and fight, like this hat says, they saw a huge problem. The president at that very moment had already gone through 2 failed impeachments, 4 criminal indictments. What was next? Because they wanted to put him in prison. They wanted to take him off the ballot. The lawfare continued. Then they tried to assassinate him. Twice. The hat I'm wearing right now has a blood spatter right there to represent how close our country came to chaos. I'm Cuban. My family immigrated here legally. Got to say that before ICE shows up. Legally in the 60s, after the Castro regime, and I'll quote Castro himself, something I rarely do. He said, "My movement isn't about communism. My movement is not about socialism. We're going to create a republic." That's what he said. It took less than 3 months after he took power to side with the Soviets and instill, I'd say, the most oppressive government on the Western Hemisphere. So what I'm seeing, what I saw during those times, and before that, we saw that with Obama, but I do want to focus, is the same thing, the same reason that my grandfather tells me all the time. He's like, man, what did I flee for? You know, it's happening here. It's happening here in drips. It didn't come at the snap of a finger like it did in Cuba. But it's coming in drips, and it's been coming in drips for a very long time. And the only thing that stopped it is this new movement of deplorables, the MAGA movement. I think the most important word in Weaponization Watch is the word watch. It means vigilance. It means looking forward and seeing the obstacles we have in our way. We have less than 3 years, ladies and gentlemen, to turn this ship around. And the weaponization is the biggest threat to our constitutional republic. Since we overthrew the king in 1776, and we created probably the most prosperous and freedom-loving people that the world's ever known. But vigilance is key because we need to be able to stop the weaponization. I will tell you that in a very short amount of time, President Trump is not going to be president. And we have a lot of work to do, and I really, really got to give a shout out and my appreciation to Cynthia for putting this together. She's basically Nick Fury putting the Avengers together for this project. And weaponization, it's not defense. It's not just defense, it's offense. And sitting in the back there is my civil attorney, Thomas. Round of applause for Thomas. We currently took the offensive in these January 6 cases, and we became the first January 6ers to sue the federal government for the weaponization that occurred during the Biden administration. It's not Enrique Tarrio versus the United States. It's Enrique Tarrio versus the Biden regime and what they did. Because what they did to my family and what they did to the families and the 1,600 other individuals was atrocious. They made an example out of us, and we need to make an example out of them. And I truly believe that with Weaponization Watch, it will be the forefront, the tip of the spear to end the weaponization of the federal government. Thank you very much, guys.
Hello, I'm Mike Howell, president of the Oversight Project. Today it's 5 years after January 6th. There's going to be a ton of redefining of that day, what it meant, and the lasting importance. And most of it is going to be incorrect. So I'm going to set the record straight about a bunch of things today so we can properly understand January 6th in the full context, not as the events of an isolated day. First, though let's talk about that isolated day. We had a rigged election in 2020. Never before in this country's history have we had the election system completely turned upside down, with ballots mailed across the country, collected at all hours with no rules to govern it. No one will ever be able to tell you what the final tallies of that election were. People were furious. They deserve to be furious over that, and still furious today. They had every right to protest that election. In fact, that is the long American tradition of how we test elections for their validity and to build public confidence. We question the system. It is a tradition as old as time. It has happened since the dawn of the Republic from both the left and the right. Well, that was ripped away from Americans as a matter of right in 2020. And of course, people were upset about it. They had every right to exercise their constitutional rights and show up at the Capitol to voice their concerns about a stolen election. Second, we need to understand the fuller context. January 6th is just a day on the calendar. The fight to extinguish the realignment in American politics has been going on for much longer, arguably back to President Trump announcing his candidacy for the presidency in 2015 when he came down the golden escalator. Since that day, there have been plots of various types, magnitude, and from different parties meant to ensure that a class of patriotic Americans could never organize and express political support behind a new movement. Not a movement controlled by internationalist Republican corporatist interests on the right, so-called, or on the left, the demagogues and anti-American interests seeking to undermine this country to this day. The special interest and donor class could never have that. They still don't want it. It's still happening today. That's why you'll see failed politicians like former Vice President Mike Pence, who President Trump picked up out of the garbage pile of the political dustbin, trying to redefine January 6th in a way that tries to undo what can be undone, the realignment of American politics. That is a strand that runs through every hoax concocted against President Trump, the Russiagate scandal, Arctic frost, you name it. And not only President Trump, but his very supporters. And January 6th presented a final opportunity for those who hate this political realignment to use the tools that were asymmetrically in their power to extinguish it once and for all. It is the fulcrum event in the weaponization of government. January 6th gave the cover, both rhetorically, politically, and legally, to justify in their minds the complete and total abuse of our legal systems, of our institutions like media, of our law firm culture, the job culture. Everything you could use to put the screws on somebody was used, justified based upon what was advertised to have happened on January 6th. That is the first chapter of the wide-scale weaponization of government. Everything that happens after January 6th is explained away by being justified because January 6th in their mind was just so bad. Now, the reason why the efforts were so successful in causing so much harm, destroying so many lives, was that because they picked on a fundamental series of asymmetries, of power imbalances within the United States of America. The most obvious one is the force of law. The FBI, the intelligence agencies, these institutions after 9/11, we as a people made the major trade-off of civil liberties and protections for total power of the states to invest in their surveillance authorities under the guise that they would be deployed against enemies overseas. Those powers were turned inwards and for political purposes over the scapegoats on January 6th. Now, they're also able to get away with this and cause so much damage because the right was willing to let it happen. And many aspects of it are still willing to let it happen today. Many who didn't support the political realignment and, a patriotic class of Americans expressing a pretty concrete and simple set of political ideas wanted the January 6th events to be used to set the clock back to the era of Bush politics. This was the thinking amongst all of the political elites, nearly. President Trump was left for dead. Nobody wanted to stand by him. He was denounced by people today that say they're his best friend. You go back to January 7th and 8th and 9th, you can see them one by one finally taking the shot where they thought they had the cover to say what they truly felt. Well, they're back on script now, and that's almost more dangerous than where we were before. Let's look at Capitol Hill. Some of the congressmen that we hold up to be our toughest attack dogs and watchdogs, where were they post-January 6th? Nowhere to be found. In fact, many of them ran away from it. Let's focus on one for a second. Chairman Jim Jordan, a fan favorite of yesteryear of Republican politicians, who chaired, the Judiciary Committee
which then established the so-called Committee on the Weaponization of Government. This was supposed to be our answer to the January 6th committee. It had available to it over $20 million in budget, the same amount of money that the January 6th committee had available to it and caused a ton of fraudulent damage. Instead of using the powers to actually, have an equal and opposite effect of that congressional committee, they spent none of the money. They had a weaponization committee, but they did no weaponization work. They subpoenaed no one meaningfully. They called no one in. They found nothing new. And they basically used it as a cover to pretend that they were actually indeed doing something about it. Out of that $20 million, they spent probably no more than $4 million. And most of that went to their own internal staff raises and business as usual. They didn't talk about January 6th at all. Now, most politicians, now that the tides have changed and President Trump's back in office, will run back and try to embrace him and pretend that none of that history ever happened. I haven't forgotten that these people did not lift a finger, and you shouldn't either. Because let's be honest, we only have a few years left with President Trump in the White House and where people are ultimately afraid of their shadows when around him. As soon as he leaves, this whole thing could go back to where we started. And our people will be as prone as they were on January 6th and moving forward. And not only those most closely connected to President Trump, but the other victims of ideological weaponization we see in every other fact pattern you can imagine, enemies of the state. Another class that we're going to get into today is the complete and utter failure of what is pompously called the conservative legal movement. There is no such thing as the conservative legal movement. Nothing that gets anywhere close to the equivalent of the left, which is combined with the power of the total state. Instead, we have a bunch of self-congratulatory beard strokers that want to sit back and write white papers and condemn those that they are embarrassed of. The victims of weaponization, those who can never show up to the country club parties or donate their way into the right dinner, or pretend to laugh and smile at that paper on the table about some constitutional issue that nobody's going to read, that'll exist only in an ever-long paragraph of footnotes about a biography that had no impact on the trajectory of the country. That is what is self-congratulatory called the conservative legal movement. None of these so-called, leaders of that stepped up or lifted a meaningful finger after January 6th, or even for President Trump's own legal defenses. Instead, people were left to empty their bank accounts, mortgage their house over and over again, and suffer immense financial consequences just to find any lawyer that was willing to take that case. Today, we're going to talk about that with some lawyers who did step up. This is, to the extent we can call it, the emergence of a new conservative legal movement. The people who actually believe in what they're doing. Instead of wanting to tend to their own resumes and sinecures, the people who are actually fighting the fight that needs to be fought. That is the weaponization of government and that fundamental asymmetry where you can be crushed if you do not believe in the total state.
The work has just started in many ways because for the opposition, their motto is weaponization today, weaponization tomorrow, weaponization forever.
What I've witnessed is the full force of a weaponized government, a system that punishes citizens instead of protecting them.
The DOJ uses novel applications of statutes to go after people that it doesn't like under vague conspiracy statutes.
Charge them with forced labor conspiracy.
He was given 300 years for a conspiracy case.
The FBI surrounded my house.
No underlying crime. It's a victimless crime.
With a conspiracy, they don't need any victims.
What they're doing is they're saying, we don't like this group of people. Well, we don't have a statute to prosecute them for it. Let's creatively interpret this thing and put these people in prison.
I could rattle off numerous cases, state and federal level. That should give everyone in this room chills.
I did 3 years in solitary confinement.
Arrested at gunpoint at 7 a.m. with 10 SUVs and helicopters.
I heard the prosecutor on day one manufacture evidence to the jury and lie to the jury.
The prosecutors had to admit that the evidence was fake, but the case continued on and they went to trial.
If that institution continues to be eroded, then we lose that freedom for all time.
What they did to my family was atrocious.
And it's going to be worse the next time. Unless we stay united.
Weaponization Watch has to continue, and you're going to help us continue the mission.
I think the most important word in Weaponization Watch is the word watch. We have less than 3 years, ladies and gentlemen, to turn this ship around.
Welcome back. I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who raised their hand when so many else ran away. You know, since January 6th, we've learned that a lot of people are only in it either for the money, their own political fortunes, and not the right reasons. And to fix this fundamental asymmetry really is a human capital problem at the end of the day. We need people who say, send me. And so I'm joined today by Tom Kniff and Nick Smith, two men who stood up and jumped in the arena and made us all better for it. So let me have them tell their stories. Why don't you kick us off, Tom?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Mike, and thanks for that robust introduction. For those who don't know me, my name is Thomas Kniff, and I am a criminal defense attorney. I actually started my career, or very early in my career, I worked as an assistant district attorney as a prosecutor for the legendary Jeanine Pirro, who now, of course, is the U.S. attorney here in Washington, D.C. Spoke with her yesterday, actually. And after serving as a prosecutor and also serving on active duty as a U.S. Army JAG, continued to serve in reserve capacity up until just last year. I started a criminal defense firm of Razor and Kniff, now Razor, Kniff and Lonstein, with the other founding partner of the firm, Stephen Razor. And for the last 20 years, I've been representing people accused of criminal offenses, in the state, federal, and military justice system. I'm probably best known these days for successfully defending Daniel Penny, who was the subject of a unjust and weaponized prosecution by Alvin Bragg's office in Manhattan for subduing a violent, psychotic maniac who was trying to, threatening and attempting to harm innocent women and children and men on a uptown New York City subway train in May of 2023. I first got involved in the J6 cause, if you will, around the time that I started representing Daniel Penny. Cynthia Hughes, of course, who was the president of the Patriot Freedom Project. I had met her, and I was very attracted to the cause because it was very obvious to me, and I think so many others, that the January 6th defendants were being used as political pawns by the Biden administration, by the Democratic Party in general, to extract every bit of equity out of the events of January 6th to aid the Democrats in the midterm elections in 2022 and beyond. And it was very obvious to me that while I may not have liked every single thing that happened on January 6th, I think there are, I don't think there is anyone who likes every single thing that happened on January 6th, that turning what was essentially a protest run amok into charges that the people were facing life sentences, people who were guilty of nothing more than perhaps trespassing being sentenced to years in federal prison, being held in pretrial detention, solitary confinement, was just absolutely anathema to everything that a civilized society and a civilized justice system should stand for. I currently represent approximately 50 January 6 defendants, my firm does, as plaintiffs, seeking to get them compensation for the violation of their constitutional and civil rights. Someone made a comment, Mike made a comment about attorneys who have, profiteered off the January 6th defendants. I am not one of those. In fact, my firm is currently going substantially into hock, if you will, to keep these cases going, because we have not taken money from any January 6th defendant. We're doing this all on a contingency basis. Now, if that works out the way I think it should work out for the clients, that will hopefully compensate my firm for our outlays. But right now, we always have been, and we still are in it because we believe in the cause, not in a financial motivation.
So before I go to Nick, I just can't resist talking about that compensation angle because it's so critically important. The economics of being able to defend people. And when we talk about restitution for the January 6ers and other victims of weaponization, that is the correction the system needs. To make people whole and for the government to admit fault is the only way you ever meaningfully inhibit the ability of this to happen in the future. When the government has to pay out those sums and to make these people who have their constitutional rights abused and trampled on, that is the check that needs to happen. And while the pardons for all the January 6ers were a terrific act of political courage by President Trump, that is the next step that I think is ultimately required. And to that end, I'm so glad that you're pushing for it. The Oversight Project sent a very long letter to the Department of Justice laying out the legal and prudential case for giving restitutions to those individuals. And so we want to be as absolutely helpful in that regard as possible, because until the system has to pay up for the harms that it did, under the fundamental premise is that your government shouldn't be harming you, and if they do, they should make you whole. I don't think we have, really achieved much in the way of accountability. So I'm thrilled you're doing that.
No, and I appreciate everything you and your organization is doing, Mike, because yes, we must, the demand for compensation. And by the way, none of these people could ever truly be compensated.
Right.
Okay. You could put as many zeros on the end of a check as you want. No one's going to trade that check, or you say, hey, look, you can spend 3 years in the DC gulag in solitary. What's your number? There is no number. Okay. There's no amount of money that a reasonable person would accept to deal with what these folks dealt with. But you can certainly help them to rebuild their lives, hopefully try to partially compensate them for what they went through. But the psychological, the emotional damage, the family separation, everything else, no amount of money can cure that. But it's the best that the government can do, unless you can turn back time, which of course we can. But the demands, it's one thing. You got lawyers like myself, Nick, a lot of great lawyers involved in the organization now, advocating for January 6ers, or have been involved. We might not be having this sort of panel if not for the great work that Nick was able to do on the 1512, right? But it needs to be a groundswell from people who are not just the attorneys, organizations like yours and beyond, because frankly, as much as I support the Trump administration, the great people he has in his administration, it has been too slow. It's been too quiet, and things need to come to a head, because these folks have waited long enough. They shouldn't have had to wait this long.
That's absolutely right. I think a lot of people in the political class just want it to be over, but it's never going to be over until we solve for it.
Yeah.
Nick, over to you. You're the architect of so many massive victories and important parts in here, whether it's 1512 or your other work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I want to focus on the silver lining in the cloud here for January 6th a little bit, because we've been fulminating about the abuses, and there are many of them. But the silver lining here was really Patriot Freedom Project and Cynthia Hughes, and I want to explain why. We talked about how there was 1,500 protesters who were charged more than that on January 6th, and they had two options. They can either come up with about $100,000 or more for sophisticated defense counsel, or they can use public defenders. Now, I'm not going to knock the public defender's office. They're often extremely competent and excellent lawyers, but there was a twist here, which is the politics. So even for the best of lawyers, it's difficult for them to separate out in their heads their priors and their political background from their profession. And what I saw over and over again was protesters telling me, I've talked to my defender and they're saying you're an insurrectionist. Okay, that's a crime. That's a very serious crime, and they hadn't even been charged with these things. So are you going to be represented zealously in court by a person telling you you've already committed a crime that you're not even charged with? So what do? They could then sell their family home. They could get a second mortgage. They could sell their car. They could mortgage their children's futures. They couldn't do that either. So what Patriot Freedom Project did was it stepped into this breach, and it used its network, its Rolodex of good, decent, qualified lawyers. I won't name all of them here. Some of them are in government now. And it put the lawyers in touch with these defendants who were getting zealous representation by public defenders. And so there was no other organization doing this. I want to stress that. None. So it's not just, Mike, you've really eloquently pointed out how few people stepped up to the plate, lawyers, to defend these people. But it was also organizations. There were so few organizations that were fundraising for them. And Cynthia deserves an enormous, deserves our gratitude for all the work that they did for these defendants.
Here, here.
And I'll just dovetail on this. I've seen some chatter online that, the attorneys that charged the January 6th defendants all this money and so forth. And look, I did not represent any January 6s in their criminal cases. I came close, but it just didn't happen. But I would, anyone who is, serious should block out that noise, because it is the amount of work that very close with some attorneys, beyond Nick, that took those cases. And $100,000, look, it's a lot of money to you, it's a lot of money to me, it is a lot of money, but the amount of work that goes into getting a competent defense, and there were some extraordinary lawyers representing these folks. $100,000 is not a lot of money in terms of legal fees and the cost to defend cases like this. I mean, I am routinely, when I do criminal defense cases in federal court in Southern Eastern District, particularly white collar cases, or any kind of case that's sort of just the volume of evidence in the January 6 cases, the amount of video and so forth, let alone the tyrannical prosecutions you were up against. It's funny, you occasionally have co-counsel from these white shoe Wall Street corporate firms, and you think, Razor Kniff and Lonstein are billing, it was a good case, we're making a good fee on this. Then you get an idea of what they're billing, and you're like, I'm working for chump change. So, any attorney who stepped up and took one of these cases, and by the way, at that time, particularly at that time, at great personal risk to their own profession, their own career, very hard to charge too much for that type of case. It's important to keep that in mind. For attorney of Nick's stature, Jonathan Crisp was someone I was very close with. I served in the military, handled a lot of cases. $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 fee. Trust me, none of those attorneys were getting wealthy or living well off that sort of fee, given the amount of work that was involved in defending these cases and the climate that they took place in.
That's absolutely right. At the end of the day, it's an industry, and people need to be able to build and have reasonable expectations around it. But that's a far cry of a difference from some of the actual profiteering that we've seen occur over various aspects of weaponization. But I want to drill into the asymmetries of why this is a problem for these victims of weaponization, but it's never a problem for the left's darlings.
No, of course not.
I saw Maduro got a lawyer pretty quickly. He might have all this money if it's not frozen.
Maduro, not only did he have a lawyer, but I had, inside knowledge from folks in the courthouse that there were other, I won't name names, but of the, most prominent members of the private criminal defense bar that are currently representing some of the most prominent defendants, names we would all know in a second, that were kind of buzzing around the courtroom because everyone knows that there's going to be an unlimited pipeline of money there, whether it is through crowdfunding that, you look at the money that's been raised by the kid with the eyebrows who shot the CEO.
Mangione.
Mangione. Yeah, sorry. I'm blanking on the name. My wife always refers to him as the one with the eyebrows. The limitless pot of gold that is available for attorneys taking that case, and hey, that's fine. That's capitalism, I guess, even though it's on behalf of a communist from these far left groups. They can name their fee.
What about the pro bono work, though? Also, it's obviously Maduro, if endless money, you're completely right. But whenever anybody who represents anything considerably left-wing, even if they have no resources, they're going to get the best pro bono counsel or have these legal foundations paying for counsel. Can you guys give me a little more color on the asymmetry of what's available on the other side?
Well, here's an example of the asymmetry. So the largest firms in the country that you're referring to not only were not doing defense side pro bono work, which is classically what it's about representing indigent defendants, they were suing them. they were suing the January 6th defendants at the same time that they were being prosecuted for virtually the exact same conduct. So that was considered pro bono work for some of these large law firms. And it was totally crushing these protesters and their families. In fact, they're still dealing with the fallout today. So I think that's the first time I had ever heard of pro bono work in suing, adding a parallel civil lawsuit on top of the criminal exposure of the person.
Yeah, Nick's absolutely right. I mean, if you look at these big, what in the industry refer to as the white shoe firms, 1,000 lawyer firms where the partners bill at $3,000 an hour, maybe probably more now. That's not my world, unfortunately. I've, through the years, back when I used to do indigent defense, represent somebody who's, convicted of homicide. And next thing you know, they're, the appeals being handled by, Sullivan and Cromwell, or, these pro bono, right? So they're willing, and everybody's entitled to a defense, everyone's entitled to an appeal, regardless of whether you're factually guilty, legally guilty, both. You've been convicted. So I applaud them, those firms, for taking on those cases. But, the irony of, hey, you're willing to represent someone who's, convicted of, murder in the second degree, but you would never go away, anywhere near defending someone who's convicted of or guilty of a simple trespass because of the politics.
Yep, that's right. And as we look at, potential areas for reform, with obviously restitution being chief amongst them, another one to remember is we're about a year out from the President Trump's executive orders as they related to big law firms. A couple took deals, a couple changed behavior, allegedly because of the potential of deals, but a year out, and we have a paper coming out on this, report, because we basically followed up with every single law firm. I haven't seen a change in the legal culture at big law whatsoever. In fact, it seems many of these firms that were targeted now are in court and opposed to many things on President Trump's agenda. What are you guys seeing about any shifts since President Trump came into office in the big firm life?
I mean, again, I'm not immersed in that world, but I don't think there's been any shift. I think that, look, those firms are about dollars and cents. Okay, I mean, you could argue every private law firm, if you're not about that, then, or at least that's not part of what you're doing, you're not going to be in business long. Right. So they may have puckered their lips and held their nose and kissed the ring, but those were business decisions, and they weren't cultural shifts. Yeah. The minute that Trump is out of office, or if we do wind up having a Democratic administration in 2028, which obviously we hope is not the case, that's all going away. Yeah. Okay, so that's them using their survival instincts and doing what they have to do. I mean, it's nice, but it is fleeting. It's temporary. It's superficial, in my opinion.
Yeah, we need to start searching for equal and opposite reactions, at least. I mean, when we look at the scale of what happened over the previous 4 years in the Biden administration, how much damage is caused, we should be thinking in terms of permanent fixes to those things,
so that's
and
exactly
proportional
right.
fixes.
You need structural changes.
Yep.
Putting in someone like Jeanine Pirro in Washington D.C., great. Some of the other U.S. attorney spots. I was with John Sarcone last night, who's up in Albany. Unfortunately, can't get confirmed because the judges there are trying to, or have, kneecapped him the way they did with Ilana Habba and so forth. All that's great, but it's all fleeting because it changes the moment the politics change. So if you're really trying to deal with weaponization, how to stop it from happening again to either side, because no one should be the subject of a weaponized government, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, but you need to make changes that are structural, that are going to endure regardless of who's in the White House or who's in Congress.
That's absolutely true, and you'll never do that until there's complete political control, at least for next few years, over the Department of Justice, and there's not now. Only about 1/3 of the U.S. attorneys are filled because the Senate is relying on this blue slip tradition. And so if you're a U.S. attorney nominee from a state with a Democrat senator, you got 0% chance of getting through. It's
absolutely. And then if you talk to the U.S. attorneys, and once again,
yep,
non-attribution, not naming names, but I've spoken with several of them privately, and they're there, but they can't. Their staff is still polluted.
Yes,
with,
I like that term.
Generations of,
Right.
ideologically, I have no problem. I don't care what any prosecutor's political affiliation is, but these are ideologically driven people that occupy those positions. So who can the U.S. attorney trust? Who can they rely on? How can they fill positions even when they have vacancies? Because the job, frankly, doesn't pay very well, despite requiring high qualifications. And for instance, in Washington D.C., where is your pool of conservative-minded Republican lawyers for the U.S. attorney in Washington D.C. to pull from? Okay, they could say, all right, well, maybe if you expand the search beyond Washington D.C., but now you're asking someone to come from some other state, some other city, uproot their life, and move to Washington D.C., where they probably or very likely have a family, own a home, have kids, for by the way, a job that's not going to pay any more than it pays anywhere else. And if you adjust for the cost of living in D.C., you're actually probably making far less in real dollars.
That's absolutely right. And Nick, I want to get into the meat and potatoes, weaponizations, but I want to make an addendum. Earlier, I was decrying the lack of a conservative legal movement, and that's not the right term. It's what these legacy institutions and graybeards in there like to call it, because they take some pride in what they think is a progression of victories, which is actually a progression of failures. What I mean when I say we need a legal movement, whatever the term should be, is really not even like ideological or political.
Right.
Frankly, I don't know what your guys' politics truly are, and nor do I care. When I use this term, like conservative, what I truly mean is like, there is a constitution that affords people rights.
Yeah.
And the judicial system and law enforcement should be the neutral arbiters of those rights. Everyone should get the fair shake. Weaponization should not be the selection of targets based on their politics or where they fit in the culture, and then applying like statutes and other things and other tactics to hurt them and to achieve ends that are outside the legal system, that are better left to the political and social systems. That's like first principles level stuff. That's the legal movement I want. I don't care if what its views on marginal tax rates are or anything else. And I think that's what we're missing and where the asymmetry comes from. But like, let's lean into this a little bit more about, and Nick, you and I have spoken about this quite a bit. Like, what is weaponization? How do you define it? What are the tactics?
Mike, I think you just put it so well. And if you're going to add a tagline to it, it's depoliticized, a depoliticized legal bar that makes a good faith effort to put politics out of their mind, especially in the criminal justice system. And it sounds like something that you can just snap your fingers and do, but it takes an earnest effort. You have to want it. And I think that's the bar that we're looking for. And weaponization is the opposite of that. Weaponization is starting with someone's background, starting with what they say online, starting with their speech, and then looking for a crime that fits their conduct to prosecute them. The Doug Mackey case is the best, is the poster child example of this. And if those prosecutors had been earnest with themselves about whether politics was playing a role, they couldn't have said it, denied it. They could not have. So that's what weaponization is. Weaponization is taking a vague statute and prosecuting conduct that is typically related to speech, is related to politics. It's and it's very dangerous.
Yes. And to follow up with you, Tom, let me ask you this question in a really simple way.
Right.
Why do you think they prosecuted up in New York your client, Daniel Penny?
Well, in that particular case, what happened was the district attorney's office caved to political pressure. My first conversations with the then assigned assistant district attorney, who I had dealings with, and is a good lawyer and a pretty reasonable guy. I could tell you that I don't think he loved the case, and I think that he saw the situation, at the very least, as being nuanced. And there were a lot of people in that district attorney's office who I know from firsthand conversations didn't think that case should be prosecuted. My initial conversations were, hey, we're going to take a slow, pragmatic approach to this. We want to do a protracted investigation. This is in early May, by the way, and maybe if we're going to go into the grand jury, it's not going to be probably not until sometime in mid-June. But in the meantime, we want to really kind of work through this. Okay, then what happened is, and keep in mind, 2023, early 2023, it was a different time than 2024, 2025. We've sort of I think as a country now kind of look back on BLM and look back on the whole George Floyd thing, and even, you know, sort of middle of the road people or middle of the road Democrats are like, okay, you know, everybody got caught up a little bit in the hysteria.
Maybe we shouldn't have burned a large part of the country.
Yeah,
maybe it's a slight overreaction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe
particularly when compared
overreaction
to January 6th.
Right.
I mean, the dollars and cents
yeah.
there just aren't even in the same ballpark.
But all that stuff was much more raw, and we haven't, you know, as a society, I don't think we had that inflection point at that time. So with the Daniel Penny situation, as more and more came out, and then it came out that he was a Marine, that he was white, that he was from Long Island, which, believe it or not, in, you know, New York City, you know, Long Island, Manhattan, Long Island is viewed as, you know, Republican, as white, as, you know, all sorts of connotations. And the Marines are the Marines, right? So the protesters then, like the day after that phone call, wind up on the tracks. They shut down the subway station. Al Sharpton is being Al Sharpton, along with, you know, that whole narrative. And you have Alvin Bragg, who was elected on, you know, his agenda of, you know, racial justice and so on and so forth. And I wound up getting a call like 36 hours later from the same prosecutor, and you could tell that he was kind of sheepish and probably embarrassed, and said, you know, look, I know our conversation we've had, but this is coming from the executive office, and I need your client to surrender tomorrow for arrest and arraignment. And what am I going to say? No. And it went from there. So in that case, you know, you clearly had a prosecutor's office that bended really within 24 hours to the political pressure that was calling for my client's scalp. And that came, by the way, you know, we talk about people like Al Sharpton, it came from right down the political line. I mean, including the governor of the state. So the governor of the state went on television and said, you know, Kathy Hochul, you can't put your arm around someone's neck and squeeze it until they die, right? So how do you compete with that?
Mm-hmm. These are my words, not yours, but he was charged because he was white. And he would not have been charged if he was not, because it fit a preferred rhetoric about the narrative of race relations in the United States. It's unconscionable. That is no place in our legal system, and there should be severe consequences for the violations of anyone's civil rights on the basis of race.
Well, I agree, but don't tell the district attorney that, including the prosecutor who actually wound up trying the case, who was a zealot, who was not reasonable, who was not anything like the first individual, whose name I won't name. You know, she was a true believer, and the amount of race baiting that was injected. She may have thought it was innocuously, but it was very obvious, right from jury selection to opening statements to summation. It was blatant, and it was really awful to see. You know, I am a former prosecutor. I am not an ideologue. I'm not a zealot. I believe that most prosecutors, most line prosecutors, are not out there to railroad people for the sake of railroading them. I think that they wind up getting involved in weaponization. They probably don't even see it as weaponization or realize what they're involved in. But this was, you know, very deliberate. I had been litigating against the Manhattan DA's office for 20 years. And I'd never seen anything like this, and frankly, I hope never to see anything like it again.
I hope so as well, and I think there needs to be consequences and making people whole if we truly want to prevent it from happening again, or at least mitigate the probability. Nick, we only got a couple minutes left too. Take us home with your final thoughts and close us out.
My final thoughts are, I hope we learned something from this whole experience on January 6th. It gave me a lot of gray hair. I saw families broken apart. I saw a lot of young children suffer from their parents' absence. Being in court and in trial in front of DC juries in these cases was not fun. It was not a pleasant experience, and when I think back on it, it's stressful. But I hope we learned something, and I hope that lesson is getting politics out of criminal law. I think that's what Weaponization Watch is about.
Gentlemen, well said. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Cynthia and Patriot Freedom Project for organizing all of us, and looking forward to more great work.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. This was great.
first channel, Saving Private Ryan, we're in the company of heroes, and two of them I'd like to point out, Cynthia Hughes and John Shafley. They have done amazing work. They are true patriots, and the work has just started in many ways because for the opposition, their motto is weaponization today, weaponization tomorrow, weaponization forever. They are preparing for their comeback, and they're doing it with the same sorts of tools and the same arrogance and the same corruption that they used in 2020. And it's going to be worse the next time unless we stay united and unless we start dealing with some of the structural issues that we're going to talk about today. I represented President Trump in the January 6th case. I defended him when no other law firm, no big law firm in the country, would take his defense. The first thing I did is hire my own lawyer. Honest to God, because they were going to come after me, and they did. I sometimes feel like the Forrest Gump of weaponization. I also represent the One Taste group, Nicole Daedone, who's in prison, Rachel Cherwitz, who are in prison for their spiritual beliefs because they opposed a woke prosecution team that does not believe in female sexuality and the empowerment of female sexuality. They look at all women as victims. Awful. And they criminalized a statute. They're looking 15 years in jail, and there's not one single victim in that case. But we need structural reform beyond President Trump. First of all, we have to eliminate immunity for prosecutors and law enforcement on day one. No prosecutor is a king or queen, and they have to be held accountable. They have to be brought before juries. The same thing for law enforcement. You violate the law, you're going to trial by a jury of our peers. Second, we have to reform these statutes. President Trump was indicted for conspiracy for taking a position and challenging the 2020 results. That was in the indictment. The theory was, according to the Biden Department of Justice, that he lied about the 2020 results, and therefore he was guilty of conspiracy. He was also charged with a KKK conspiracy dating back to the Civil War. The same thing that Doug was prosecuted for. When I went to see a thug prosecutor named Jack Smith, he said, well, we can prosecute him because there was this case in the Eastern District. We just got a conviction for a meme under the same statute, KKK statute. We have to reform the statutes. We have to work with Congress. Nicole and Rachel are in jail for violating something called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. They didn't traffic a single person. They had a spiritual and sensual practice that the Biden administration, the woke prosecutors did not like, and they got prosecuted under this statute. It has to stop. It has to end. And the first thing we need to do is reform the criminal statutes that give incredible discretion to prosecutors. Weaponization is a function of prosecutorial misconduct. Ed Martin, you visit him, the dude is amazing. I mean, you know, all heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear trench coats. And he's like he's like everywhere. But where's his staff? He needs 50 lawyers. When they came after President Trump, they had 35 prosecutors and 50 agents working on the case. They assembled 14 million documents and 500 witness interviews. And the thug prosecutor, Jack Smith, said, I want a trial in 90 days. 90 days. The judge said, no, that's really unreasonable. We'll give you 120 days to prepare for trial. And by the way, Mr. Lauro, don't talk about politics in my courtroom, but we'll set the trial for the Monday before Super Tuesday. Where were the rule of law people? Where were the crying liberals? So we have to deal with structural issues. And finally, we need better judges. We need courageous judges, and there has to be a litmus test. Thou shalt not weaponize the law. Thou shalt abide by the Constitution. And thou shalt honor due process. All of the stories we heard today, and I've been practicing law as a criminal defense lawyer for 40 years, and I no longer put this on my resume, but I was a federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of New York before that. And that place is a cesspool. But every single instance that we heard is a denial of due process. We need judges that will respect the law, respect due process, and not look at themselves as politicians in robes. And that has got to change, absolutely. I have hope. I have hope because of people like Cynthia and John. But we will either hang together or we will most certainly hang separately. But we have our work cut out for us.
Dear American public, my name is Anjali. I'm here to tell you about my friends. I've been a close friend of Nicole Daedone and Rachel Cherwitz for over a decade. For 6 of those years, these women have been crushed by the same FBI, DOJ, and media playbook used to try and destroy the lives of others you're hearing about today. During a harrowing 6 years of FBI investigation, a rogue FBI agent used fabricated evidence, coerced witnesses into false victim stories, hacked privileged communications, colluded with media organizations like Netflix, and shut down over 70 bank accounts of theirs, mine, and our families. Prosecutors threatened our own lawyers with criminal charges for simply trying to defend us. This process has nearly bankrupted us all. We took the president's mantra, fight, 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 and we followed it. We fought, fought, fought. We fought back, exposing evidence of this corruption in the media, in court filings, but it was not enough to deter these prosecutors. They doubled down. Prosecutors put on a 5-week trial where paid witnesses testified that they regret their choices from 10 years prior. No violence, no threats, no victims in this conspiracy charge, just regret. Now my friends are convicted of forced labor conspiracy. This is the first time in this country's history anyone has been charged with this standalone conspiracy. The same lawyers who fought for President Trump are now fighting for us. Professor Alan Dershowitz said a bright line of justice has been crossed in this case, and these women should not be in prison. John Lauro said this is exactly the kind of tool prosecutors under a Newsom DOJ will use to attack conservatives. Christian and Buddhist faith leaders have joined these men in saying this prosecution is unjust, un-American, and dangerous for the First Amendment. Prosecutors didn't stop with the conviction. They are now seeking the statutory maximum sentence, 20 years. They want to sentence my friends based on further false charges that were never brought up in trial. They're aiming to smear my friends in any way possible to ensure that their own crimes don't come to light. My friends are not the only people who have been targeted. One of the hardest things to see is how this is a playbook, one that is being used over and over against innocent Americans. Prosecutors are stretching the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, called the TVPA, far beyond its scope, using the salacious allegations in our case to distract from what's an inappropriate use of the statute. 5 months before the indictment, Netflix aired a true crime movie using a fabricated diary read aloud by a government witness. The filmmakers helped create the evidence. 4 weeks before trial, prosecutors admitted that the evidence was fake. The lead case agent used stolen attorney-client privileged information, mishandled evidence, and encouraged witnesses to destroy chain of custody. 3 witnesses came forward saying they were pressured by the FBI into saying they were victims. One of the defendants who refused to turn victim was arrested at 7 a.m. at gunpoint with 10 SUVs and helicopters. My 2 friends have been sitting in prison for 7 months because we fought back and are willing to bring these tactics to light. The narrative the government is depicting is not my friends' true legacy. This is their legacy. They created a meditation that helps thousands find inner peace. They created Free Food, a sit-down restaurant in Harlem, New York, serving 700 meals weekly to the homeless. Their prison monastery program has transformed the lives of over 200,000 inmates and corrections officers. These women have not stopped their good work since being sent to prison 7 months ago. They teach meditation courses and hold daily walking groups to help the women get healthy. Nicole recently published a best-selling book from prison, which is being celebrated by officers and inmates alike. My friends don't belong in prison cells. They are innocent. They belong out in the world, changing lives for the better. Please help us get the truth out. Pass this on, share it with your friends, read Nicole's book called Jailbirds in Flight. Help my friends get out of prison.
Hi, I'm Ron Elfenbein. I'm an emergency room doctor. Just imagine one day waking up and finding yourself on the receiving end of a federal indictment. That was the nightmare that I lived for the last 3 years, and I'm still living. I feel like I'm wearing a tin hat when I talk about this, I really do, but it's just been devastating to my life and to my family's life. I'm an emergency room doctor, and during COVID I became very active, and I opened up an urgent care center before COVID, and then during COVID we became active in terms of testing, and then once the monoclonal antibodies became available, we became the de facto treatment site basically for the state of Maryland, where I live. And we were bigger than Johns Hopkins, bigger than University of Maryland. We were like the largest site in the state, doing 200 to 300 infusions a week, which basically represented the cure for COVID. And this was in direct opposition essentially to the media narrative and the administration's narrative of everybody needs a vaccination. So we were happily infusing people and saving people's lives, and it was really a wonderful thing to be a part of. So much so actually that I was awarded by our governor and our state legislature a personal citation, and the State Medical Society named me its Person of the Year for all the work that I did. Well, the Biden administration decided in its capacity to shut the program down based on spurious data and misreading of that spurious data. And I went on Fox News and I called them out and I said they're going to kill people. And turns out I was right, because 2 weeks later they said, oh yeah, we did misread the data by a factor of 50%. Instead of 70% prevalence of the Omicron variant, it was only 20%. So they got that data wrong, and they were totally wrong in shutting the program down. Well, I found myself indicted on federal healthcare fraud charges out of the blue. No one had called me, no one had emailed me, no one had asked for any records, nothing. They just decided to just swing the hammer and indict me and destroy my life and destroy my family's life as well. So I didn't do anything wrong, so we took it to trial. And every theory that the government had was completely eviscerated by fact and by my attorneys, and mostly importantly by facts. They never looked at the documentation. They never interviewed any of my partners or the people that I worked with. They got my name wrong on the indictment, and the things that they charged me with, their own expert witness testified directly against what they said. They said that we weren't spending enough time with patients. Their own expert said time doesn't matter. They said that it wasn't medically necessary for us to have a provider see the patients when they were getting tested. Their own expert at trial testified it was medically necessary, in direct opposition to what they said in the indictment. So they basically indicted me with no evidence and no proof. They got my name wrong. They never subpoenaed my work emails. They subpoenaed my personal emails, but they never even looked at my work emails. Clearly they targeted me because I spoke against them and because I went on national news and said bad things about the Biden administration. So anyway, went to trial, and every one of their theories was shot down by their own experts and by my attorneys and by the facts. The last thing that they decided on, because they had gotten everything wrong, the government gets the last say. So at closing, the government attorney says, you might be asking yourself, jurors, what the right level of coding was. But the good news is you don't have to know. You just have to know that Dr. Elfenbein is wrong and he's a criminal. And then they said, use your common sense. So unfortunately, they get the last word, but my response to that would have been, there is no common sense. That's like, have you ever filed a tax return? There's no common sense in any of that. The government set the rules up, I followed the rules, and then they're saying, well, you shouldn't have followed the rules, you should have used your common sense. So unfortunately, the jury bought it and they convicted me, but the judge, having sat through the entire case, who was the chief judge of Maryland, threw the whole case out and acquitted me. And not only did he acquit me, but he also said, in the case that the government decides to appeal this case, you will have a new trial. So he did both, which is unheard of for a judge to do. Here's a couple of quotes that I found pretty intriguing. The court, having closely observed the testimony and parsed the evidence in this case, concludes that the evidence weighs so heavily against the verdict that it would be unjust to enter judgment, end quote. Quote, there can of course be no crimes if the defendant complied with those rules, end quote, the defendant being myself. So the judge clearly understood. He wrote a 93-page opinion, which again is unheard of in federal law, that the judge would take away a jury verdict and write such a lengthy opinion. And 2 weeks before the Trump administration was brought into office, the Biden administration appealed the case. And in a very head-scratching decision, the Fourth Circuit overturned my acquittal, but they still offered me a new trial. So now I'm facing the prospect of a new trial in August. So these people, they hope to bankrupt you. They hope to destroy your life, destroy your family's lives. They hope to get you to plea. That's their goal. They want you to plea. And if you won't plea, you go to trial. They find any way to lie, cheat, and steal to convict you. It's horrible, it's awful, and it's complete weaponization of the Justice Department, and I am a victim of that. So I am facing a new trial in August, and I'm trying as hard as I can to get somebody to hear my story and make this go away, because it's unjust, it's unfair, and it should go away. Thank you.
On the anniversary of January 6th, I think it is an important thing to step back and look at what the FBI was doing prior to January 6th, what they were doing in the lead up to it. And a great example of that is the Michigan Governor Whitmer kidnapping plot case. So I could spend 10 hours talking about that case, but to make a long story short, essentially the FBI spent the year prior to January 6th creating militia groups, infiltrating pre-existing militia groups, befriending a group of people, and bringing people together from across the country to try to manufacture and instigate a plot to kidnap a governor that wouldn't have existed without the FBI actively creating it. And that resulted in 14 men being arrested in October of 2020, 1 month before the 2020 election. This event was used by the Biden and Harris campaign to smear President Trump, to say that he was radicalizing these far-right extremist militia groups and that these people were like ISIS. And so we had 4 trials for this case, 2 federal, 2 state trials. Half of these men were acquitted due to the egregious FBI misconduct in this case. But we still have 5 men in prison right now. 2 of them are at Florence Supermax in solitary confinement-like conditions, and 3 of them are in state prisons in Michigan. They're all trying to appeal their wrongful convictions. The Sixth Circuit denied the federal appeal of Adam Fox and Barry Croft, who were framed as ringleaders of this. And so they have a writ of certiorari before the Supreme Court through Barry Croft's lawyer. Adam doesn't have a lawyer at all right now. That's something that is really needed. And the 3 state guys have their appeals going with the Michigan Court of Appeals, but these are processes that could last for years. And these men need to be pardoned. And it's important to understand that, again, prior to January 6th, why was the FBI creating militia groups, a national militia group, a 3%er group led by an informant who was a child sex offender, with other informants posing as heads of other state chapters? They had targets across 15 states, and they were trying to make it a multi-state plot where governors would be kidnapped at the same time or capitals would be stormed at the same time. And they framed these men as wanting to overthrow the country. The media covered the cases horrifically. They didn't do any real research into it. They simply acted as government stenographers and really convicted these men in the court of public opinion before they ever got to trial. Their trials were all manipulated in the same way the January 6 trials were, where it was already prejudiced and then the government withheld exculpatory information, or they prevented people from testifying on behalf of these men. And a lot of other egregious things happened. So my prayer and my message to President Trump would be, you have the mandate, you have the power to pardon these men. You probably can't pardon the state guys, but the 2 federal men sitting in Florence Supermax right now, you can pardon these men, send them home to their families where they belong. These men were not violent. They're not accused of doing anything violent. They were charged under vague conspiracy statutes. Oh, they were conspiring. They wanted to do something. Really, they didn't want to do anything. The FBI led them around and created meetings and events for them and then filmed them and recorded them after supplying them with copious amounts of marijuana and alcohol. That's what happened here. These men are innocent and they should be free. They should be home with their families. And this case should be remembered, and the story should be considered part of January 6th because that was the lead up to it. So on the anniversary of January 6th, it is so important that we don't forget those guys, that they aren't left behind, and that they are pardoned and sent home to be with their families.
Hello, my name's Lauren Rodriguez. I'm the wife of Keone Rodriguez, who is currently serving a 5-year sentence for a crime of which he is innocent of. The Southern District of New York, beginning under President Biden, aggressively prosecuted my husband due to a small number of individuals allegedly using the software they created, and for words and ideologies that the Biden administration didn't like. As Representative Warren Davidson said in regards to this case, it's like prosecuting Microsoft for cartels using Excel. At every turn, our case demonstrated that the attorneys in the Southern District of New York care nothing for truth or justice. From lying, manipulating evidence to fit their narrative, to violating Brady and ignoring President Trump's executive orders. We also had a judge acting as a 5th prosecutor from the bench. We had no chance of receiving justice. Our only hope now lies with President Trump. Sir, please, stand up for liberty and the rule of law that this great nation was founded on, and grant my husband, Keone Rodriguez, a pardon. Then put an end to the corruption and weaponization that has continued to occur by unelected and unappointed line prosecutors within the Department of Justice, so that another American family doesn't needlessly go through what we have. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Garrett Ziegler. I'm the founder of Marco Polo, which is a nonprofit research group committed to exposing corruption. During the Biden regime, we took it upon ourselves to be the entity that went through the Biden laptop, which was dropped off in Wilmington, Delaware, and never retrieved. It was a case of property abandonment. And it's probably the most interesting, hilarious case of property abandonment in American history, at least in the 21st century. On that laptop there was 200 gigabytes of digital material ranging from photos, videos, emails, text messages, calendar entries, everything that constituted the former president's son's digital life. And how this relates to the media ecosystem and how they not only cover ridiculous things, but also choose not to cover certain stories. And that's my main thesis for today, is that Hunter Biden and what constituted the material on the Biden laptop was one of the biggest suppression operations in this century. And not just that, but what we learned from this over the past half decade and what we can do differently going forward, and you know what has happened now since that fail son received a pardon in the waning days of his father's administration, and you know what this means for the current administration and what loose ends need to be tied up in a good way, people involved, associations that need to be explored that protected this fail son. So Marco Polo, as I mentioned at the top, it is a private investigative group. We are one of the few entities on the right doing this type of work. We were modeled after Fusion GPS, which is of course a notorious group of liars on the left, Glenn Simpson. They worked with Mark Elias, as you'll recall, to put together something called the Steele dossier. And why this is relevant to the media is because the Steele dossier and the lewd assertions therein were fed to multiple media outlets. Stenographers like Mike Schmidt at the New York Times and other people just lapped up all of those accusations in a very, very uncritical way. So that operation that occurred in 2016 exposed to me the need for the right to have an alternative to Fusion GPS that actually published true material. And you'll recall that in early 2021, the way that somebody could get the contents from this device was basically on a Chinese website called G News and a couple of other outlets, because Twitter had basically the analogy I use is Hunter Biden was basically a baby oxen. And you know, if you've watched a Yellowstone documentary or been to the national park before, you know that when a baby oxen is threatened by, say, a pack of wolves, the adults literally surround the young. And that's what Hunter Biden was. Hunter Biden was essentially a baby oxen surrounded by the most corrupt media apparatus in the Western world, CNN, ABC, CBS, all saying that it couldn't be verified, that because Rudy Giuliani was involved, that it was necessarily suspicious, even though, of course, the paperwork that constituted the agreement of Hunter Biden dropping this off at the repair shop was in the record. It was in federal lawsuits that the shop owner and a former speaker today, Nick Smith, actually now represents the shop owner. All of that was out there by early 2021, and so we saw a need to break through this media ecosystem and suppression operation and put up all of the contents from the device online. So we had a searchable database, and our goal was to make this available to the public, but more so to writers, to be able to use this email database so that then writers could cite and hyperlink to the exact email. There's never been this level of specificity in digital material before in American politics, that you can actually link to the exact EML file. It's an innovation. I'm very proud of it. And you can still today, and by the way, I want these open and these operational till the end of time. I want Hunter's grandchildren to be alive and still be able to go read their grandfather's emails. It's very, very funny, and I think a very cool thing to be able to do, because the internet's written in ink. And so we have to make these mistakes on the part of the opposition really hurt. And, apart from just suppressing this material, the other thing, this is my second thesis for the day, the other thing that we ought to do is create a new prestige ecosystem for writers and activists on the right. The big conveyors of prestige are no longer available to us. The Pulitzer Prizes, those sorts of awards that signal to the public and to fellow writers that you are intelligent, hardworking, they are basically shut off from us. So the patrons in our movement, the lawyers, the writers, we have to think long and hard about how do we reward the people on our side, because those awards, as I mentioned, if you have wrongthink, if you think that men can't be women and vice versa, if you have these basic opinions that are not liked in polite society, you won't get a Pulitzer. And even to this day, even after the Steele dossier collusion was revealed, Mike Schmidt still has his Pulitzer on Russia reporting from the New York Times. And unless we create those new prestige mechanisms for our own people, we'll be, basically second-class citizens, not just in the political realm, but in the cultural realm. And this means starting new magazines, rewarding the people on our side who have artistic and writing talent with those type of awards, I think, can inspire more courage on our side. And that's really what it comes down to. And this is my third and final thesis, is separating a lot of fence sitters on the right is they do not want to risk their job or their sinecure or money. And that's what separates, in my opinion, and I say this humbly, from our group from other people on the right. We don't care if we're going to get sued. We trust that putting the truth out there in its unvarnished form will attract the public. We had two lawsuits aided by the media, the lawsuits that Hunter Biden and Kevin Morris brought against our group. They footnoted a bunch of articles from CNN saying how I'm a bigot and a hater and somebody who aided with the J6 insurrection because I helped Peter Navarro with an election fraud report back in December of 2020. And they use those URLs cited in the lawsuit as gospel truth, as the facts, as the background facts. And we really have to create new outlets for our own people to dispel those. And that's what we're doing with Marco Polo now. We have a couple of beats, a couple of sex trafficking cases we're watching in the SDNY and other things. And as long as Hunter Biden is continuing to do these 3-hour podcasts with people in the media who are carrying water for him today and refuse to push back on any of the stuff that he says in these podcasts, there is the need for us. So I think that apart from creating new prestige mechanisms for writers and media folks on our side, we have to really think deeply on how we personalize our attacks. I know that this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but one of the things I think President Trump does so well, and one of the really rare things for a president to do, is to not make the attacks so broad. Like, if you're going to call out the mainstream press and the lying press on a particular article, it's not enough just to say the outlet. 2 minutes into this, I was talking about Mike Schmidt. The people who are at these institutions are real people, and they have identities. And the more pressure we put on the particular, I'm not talking about any threat, but you have to particularize your grievance. If somebody just throws their hands up and says CBS is corrupt or ABC is corrupt, that's not really an insight. It takes work to know, okay, who precisely within this propaganda outlet is propagating these lies. And now, to this day, Schmidt is married to another horrible human being named Nicole Wallace, who every single day at 4 p.m. gets on MSNBC and spews her lies. And to the degree that we can push back against specific people, I think is very, very good. Of course, this is one of the things I hate about Trump. From his 2015 encounter with Katie Tur. Remember when Katie Tur was trying to grill him on an illegal immigration topic? And he said, well, try to get it out, Katie. She didn't even know what she was talking about. She was trying to spew this stat that she couldn't even articulate. And to this day, Katie Tur is still recovering from that. And so I think that we have to particularize our grievances, because only then can we have measurable results. A measurable result is getting Nicole Wallace and Mike Schmidt off of the airwaves. There has to be a concerted effort to make sure they no longer have a public platform.
Welcome back. Mike Howell here of the Oversight Project. We have an awesome panel. This is going to be a fun panel, and I'm happy to be the immoderate moderator of it. But first, a shout out to Garrett Ziegler, As a man whose favorite communication style is ranting, that was a heck of a rant slash speech, and well said, all true. We have some great panelists here, very prolific public commentators, leaders who have built things, who have been in the crucible, and I don't want to waste any more time to take away from them. So I'm going to turn it over to my good buddy, Douglas Mackey, to talk about the issues we're here to talk about, which is the role that the media plays in narrative shaping, how that deprives people of their rights, makes them targets, and so forth. But before I do, we're talking about media. We're not talking about the other thing, which is called journalism. People conflate those two things too much. We don't have really journalism in this country. We have corporate media control. And so with that, just setting the table, Doug, over to you, buddy.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. So my name's Douglas Mackey, and 7 days after Joe Biden was inaugurated in 2021, I got a knock on the door. It was the FBI saying that I was under arrest. I said, what for? What could this possibly be? It turns out in 2016, I sent out a meme saying that Hillary Clinton supporters could text their vote, and they felt like this meme was the basis of a grand conspiracy to steal the election from Hillary Clinton. So that night, after I got out of arraignment, well, first of all, let's talk about the arraignment. I had no idea what was going on other than I was being charged with a federal felony. Conspiracy against rights, a 19th century statute, colloquially known as the KKK Act, the Klan Act. So so why in the world am I being charged with this crime? They slapped a copy of the criminal complaint. And as I'm reading the criminal complaint, as the lady U.S. Marshal is taking me out of leg irons, I realize that this tracks a dox effort that the Huffington Post wrote about me 2 years earlier in 2018. So the Huffington Post story became the basis for this indictment in certain ways, and sort of identifying me as somebody who was using this fictional satirical Twitter account in 2016. So I get out of the arraignment. I got the criminal complaint in my hand. I go home, but I have to well, first of all, they encouraged me not to bring my wallet or my cell phone to the arraignment. So once I got out of there, my roommates had no idea what was going on, so they had left about a few minutes earlier. So I had to bum a ride with a nice Haitian gentleman cab driver who allowed me to get my wallet and go to an ATM and pay. And that very night, what is Rachel Maddow's leading segment on her show? Well, none other than my prosecution of some guy posting a joke in 2016. Fast forward, so to make a long story short, 2 years later, we went to trial after trying to dismiss the case and failing. And we were interested in bringing in an expert commentator from the University of Alabama, and he was going to talk about meme culture and that sort of thing and give an expert opinion. Well, a freelancer purportedly working for the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, was threatening this gentleman that he was going to go to his university and get him in hot water. So he backed out at the last minute. So the point of all this is today, fast forward to today, to make a long story short, I won the case. I was acquitted, and now I'm working with Weaponization Watch with Cynthia Hughes, who I think very much were putting this on. But we've noticed as we've studied cases like mine and like others of weaponized justice, mostly Biden-era cases, some of which are still ongoing today, there are a number of alarming similarities. We know that they are selective prosecutions with novel and stretched legal theories, threats of excessive and punitive sentencing, and more importantly, media coordination in both directions. Too often the media appears to operate in lockstep with these prosecutors, and I would mention that it's a symbiotic relationship. We see when the media is feeding the prosecutors information that they can use in their cases, and we're also seeing where the prosecutors are feeding the media information that they can leak to set a favorable narrative, which is obviously not what they're supposed to be doing, but this is how they set the landscape for trials and everything else to turn the media against you. So we've seen with the Biden era DOJ, with the media collusion here with the prosecutors, where conservatives, Trump supporters, or individuals connected to industries that Biden simply didn't like crypto, especially, are targeted, publicly smeared, and then aggressively prosecuted. So it makes you wonder whether these journalists are speaking truth to power, or whether they are stenographers, or in some cases, mop-up men, regime janitors trying to clean up the mess, in some cases, that the government has created. So I'll give you an example. Just recently, Trump's Solicitor General, John Sauer, directed the EDNY, Eastern District of New York, to seek dismissal of charges in a FIFA bribery case related to the World Cup. And the DOJ had made the determination that these charges were not going to uphold on appeal to the Supreme Court, and they didn't want to defend them given the court's recent history of limiting federal fraud statutes. So what we saw immediately was that career prosecutors within the EDNY pushed back against John Sauer and leaked to the press, in this case, Bloomberg. And this underscored the career line prosecutors, their willingness to buck Trump's administration and to go to the media and to go around and try to get their way, and to use the media selectively as a blunt instrument against Trump and against MAGA. There's other cases. We've seen a number of cases where the FBI has worked hand in hand with Netflix. There's a case called One Taste, where they actually use a lot of manipulated video footage as evidence in the case, and got in trouble for it with the courts. Of course, nobody was ever punished, and the judges didn't even slap them on the wrist. So we see this time and time again, and it's an issue that we have to confront head on as we enter these midterms coming up.
Yeah, before we proceed really quickly, I want to fixate on the last thing you said about Netflix and the One Taste case. This to me is such an absurd example of how out of control things were under the previous, administration of justice, where you have the FBI working with a clear ideological and partisan outlet that's a supranational corporation. Netflix is one of the biggest in the United States, and so big that people truly understand its power. It's where Susan Rice goes. It's where Barack Obama goes. It is above the government in that, it funds the government and the people in there. It is more powerful and can hurt your civil rights by shaping the opinions of jurors and people around the country by just pushing them with content for a clear partisan or ideological or whatever purpose. How can anyone in America walk in front of a jury that has just seen a Netflix production that's being advertised and highly produced that's shaped by the federal government against the people they're going after? And you look at all the things the Trump administration needs to unravel, and this one that's sitting in front of them is just an example of how out of control things have gotten and how hard it is for them, for whatever reason, to turn the system of justice around to back to a place of neutrality. And so, I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about that case and the role of Netflix more broadly, and then also the role of the government in shaping narratives, because that is so counter to our system of the neutral administration of justice, where you can have Hollywood level propaganda films against you while you're fighting for your rights. It makes zero sense. And if the Trump administration wants to win, they should look no further. I promised not to talk too much, and I made myself a liar. So, Colonel, over to you.
Well, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Doug and Garrett, for letting me be on this panel. I'm not sure why I'm here, except for, I want to say a couple things from a military and veterans perspective and a political perspective, because I entered the political arena shortly after I retired from the Air Force in 2013. I ran for the U.S. Senate in a state in the South against two establishment candidates. And the media was used in every race that I was in thereafter, because they saw that my message, which was secure the border, energy independence, and stop the endless wars, was resonating with the American people. The media was used to set a narrative to attack me personally over and over again. After serving over 32 years honorably in the United States Armed Forces, had been selected for command several times, had made a high enough rank where people said I was a senior leader. So after all of that, they tried to make me look like somebody that I wasn't. And they succeeded, because the media, the political parties, and the government coordinated together. And that's the failure that we have here, really, of the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, and the failure of what we call the free press. It's now the corporate media that is a narrative generator on behalf of the government. that is a narrative generator on behalf of political parties that want to maintain their power. And it's a narrative generator on behalf of people that probably shouldn't even be in this country. As a matter of fact, they shouldn't be in this country. The latest example of that is independent journalist Nick Shirley's Somali daycare and healthcare company fraud that's thought to be upwards of $9 billion. That's $9 billion of your money and my money that's being defrauded from us on behalf of a group of individuals that our politicians have not just allowed, but insisted be brought to this country. And it doesn't matter whether they were Democrats in charge like Tim Walz, who's no longer going to run for governor, or Tom Emmert, who is from Minnesota, and a Republican that shamed people for questioning wanting to bring the Somali refugees into this country in such large numbers. And that's the problem, is this entire deck of the corporate media is being used to work against you, the American taxpayer, the American citizen, where the free press was designed by our founders to be the watchdog, to be the voice on the outside that watched the government, that watched the corporations, that watched the powerful, so the folks without power would have a power in and of them to themselves in order to counteract that type of ideology, that type of effect. And we no longer have that. And that's why after I ran for office, I decided to get into the independent media business. And you're watching some of you are watching this on my social media live stream channels, I hope. Like on X, you can find me at Rob Manus there, simply because we have to have a set of institutions, as Garrett so wisely brought up in his rant. We have to build institutions to take the power away from the institutions that have become completely infested with leftist, progressive, Marxist ideology and ideologues, and the establishment, political, powerful people that still hold that power on both sides of the aisle that want to keep their power and not let you have what you deserve, which is a free country that is free from corruption and where your tax dollars aren't wasted unwisely. And instead, maybe they're used to get rid of homeless veterans. We have over 30,000 homeless veterans on any given night in this country that are sleeping out in the cold. Why aren't we using all that money for that? Or to take care of the elderly more and increase their Social Security payments, for God's sake. You've been robbing Social Security for over 6 decades. Why not make it solvent using that money? And it all comes down to the media being able to control the narrative for whatever party they're doing it, and their willingness to do that instead of being the party that's supposed to be pushing back on our behalf. And that's why the weaponization of media is so important and is so wrong to be happening in this country.
Colonel, I can't resist. Now I'm going to make myself doubly a liar of mini rants, not a full-on rants. But on the first principles of what you just laid out, the information industry, or whatever we want to call it, media, journalism, is not like another institution. It's indispensable in that this whole system and experiment in government, 250 years old, coming up here pretty soon, doesn't work if not for that thing. Because the whole point is the people are in charge of the government. We are the sovereign. That is what makes America unique. And that's why enshrined within the other, or the other parts of the First Amendment is the right of the free press. Because the founders knew that unless the people had unfiltered information to make independent judgments as to what their government is doing, should be doing, and so forth, that there is no potential for self-government. And that's where we're at now, like a civically uninformed population that's consumed with propaganda and whatnot. And the powers to be, when you see the relationship between the government and MSNBC, CNN, the Washington Post, New York Times, FBI working hand in glove with them throughout prosecutions and investigations and shaping narratives about it, we are so backwards and opposite of what the paper of the Constitution says in our practice of government. And so like that one is beyond the pale. And its ramifications for like political economy are one thing, but also in the administration of justice, which is the next frontier. You cannot have a free and fair and neutral justice system if you do not have like a vibrant and independent information economy. And so
I totally agree with that. And it goes into our national security too. I just want to, we talked before the panel, and I think we're all in agreement. Some of this is what the media refuses to cover. and won't cover. And let me just tell you about a guy that I met just a few weeks ago, and I told this story on my show. He's a retired now brigadier general from the Air Force named Chris Sage. Chris has been pummeled by the weaponization of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Inspector General system, over 4 years now, until he was forced to retire because they took his second star promotion away using the auto pin twice.
Wow.
He was forced to retire on the 31st of December, just a few days ago. But the media has not covered that story because they're so invested in the COVID pandemic policies that still have all been proven to have been wrong, and the unlawful order that has been proven to be unlawful of making the military get the vaccine for COVID. But here's the other untold part of the story. It's not just that people like General Sage, but there are thousands of others below him at lower rank that don't have any power, that don't get the visibility, that are being treated the same way. But that's not the real issue. The real issue the media is not covering, ladies and gentlemen, is that over 95% of our force took that COVID-19 vaccine. And in spite of people like Dr. Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long and Ted Macy and Mark Bashaw and whistleblowers stating that the physical health of this force is in question and the readiness of this force to be able to go and fight and win a major war if they were called upon to do that is in question, is not being reported on and not being told the truth to the American people so they have an understanding of what is happening and can make decisions to change this government and this executive branch that is almost completely out of the control of the elected president of the United States, which is not what the founders intended. And that's extremely important. We don't know if our force is ready or not because of these adverse reactions to that shot.
Terrifying. And we all know it was a political and ideological sorting exercise to clear out the military of people who actually had conservative or even common sense views. You said AutoPen, and I'm only going to take 30 seconds here because it connects to the media. After we released our AutoPen findings in March of last year, it's 2026 now, 2025, the New York Times, 2 weeks afterwards, went viral, probably because you guys retweeted it, thank you, called it a conspiracy theory on their big headline thing. A gentleman by the name of Ken Bensinger of the New York Times, longtime regime propagandist. I call him a bum steerer. If you look it up, a bum steerer is a lie, and he likes to lie. Well, 3 months after that, the New York Times got Joe Biden interviewed. He came out of the basement because, he was taking too much smoke from the AutoPen, and he admitted to the whole thing. He said, I didn't even approve the individual pardons. I just said, do some pardons and you can fill it in. So the New York Times is, proved how many other times over to be complete fabricators and liars. We know why they do it. We know exactly why they do it. They're a propaganda arm of the far left. And frankly, foreign nationals who run that company. Garrett, fill in the blanks.
Well, I would say that in a parallel track to creating new awards for prestige on the right, we should also urge elected officials, to the degree we can, to stop caring about what those legacy outlets put out. Their power, yes, they're still official papers of record, but their power is sentiment generation. If they really hate you enough, they can tar you enough, and even Republicans don't want to be seen by or seen with you if you get called certain names by the press. And so what it comes back to my third thesis of the intro, is we have to stop caring about what they think, and the only way you do that is if you have courage. Mm-hmm. If you do not have the requisite backbone, you're going to care about what the left-wing press says about you, and sometimes it's only through a baptism by fire. You get indicted or you get sued, and sort of through scar tissue, you stop caring about what the left-wing press thinks about you. But we have still many people in Congress, in the House and Senate, who believe what those outlets say. And I think the best way to produce the righteous suspicion in those people's hearts is to use primary source documents. I'm going to talk about our book once more. The reason why they've resorted to the lowest logical fallacy, there's actually a logical fallacy pyramid that I love. I have it put up in my office. The bare bottom of it is name calling. They've resorted to calling me a racist, sexist, homophobic, Jew hater. It's all BS. But the reason why they've resorted to the bottom of that pyramid is because you cannot argue with primary source data. And so and this is why I love what the Oversight Project was doing with the pardon investigation, quasi-pardon, I should say, is it's reliant upon primary source data. We cannot, I'm a Christian, so I do believe in the miraculous. I believe that Jesus was born from a virgin and was raised from the dead. But beyond that, on this side of heaven, I don't believe in the miraculous. We should demand primary source evidence. So everybody who is a truthful writer, a truthful reporter, should become much more obsessed with finding the primary source evidence. For example, in Mr. Mackey's case, when you dig into a particular miscarriage of justice, the very first questions that we should be asking, and it's what the press doesn't, is who can get me the trial transcripts? I no longer will trust what somebody's opinion about those transcripts is if they do not provide the primary source evidence. It's like the only thing that Reuters does well. They will hyperlink to a court ruling. Okay, and I appreciate that, even though they're the enemy. Because if they don't, then I have to spend 5 minutes finding the URL. But in every piece that we do from here on out, and you guys do it already, but this is for the folks watching this. Really do your audience a service, and it will inspire trust on their part, because they will start rightfully believing that, hey, they're not hiding anything from me. Yes, they're writing about the thing that occurred, but they're providing the trial transcript. They're providing the wire transfer, right? That's the way that we can distinguish ourselves between from the blob. Is we think people are intelligent enough. My final thought is the folks that persecuted Douglas, they really have a low opinion of blacks, and I'll tell you why. They truly think, and if we're taking them at their word, that blacks are dumb enough to believe a meme that says you can vote by text message. It's bigotry of low expectations. They think black people are so dumb that they will follow that meme. And that's the way I would flip it around on them. We actually believe blacks don't think memes are how to vote. And that's another way to basically blow up their whole thought process of, hey, that's another way of looking at it. So I just think that all of this, by the way, all of what I'm saying only occurs if you have courage. If you do not have the requisite courage, none of these steps are going to be taken. So you need to ask God for the courage to do these reforms.
So lots to bounce off here. I'm going to toss one to the group for whoever wants to grab this third rail. I want to know what it is that you think is in the psychological or DNA of elected Republicans and other leaders where they need validation from MSNBC or whatever they call it, MS Now, or New York Times, the Sudoku rag, or whomever else. It's they want it, they crave it, and frankly, calling a spade, the White House plays into this game too. You see Axios continually getting scoops. Press that has been called the enemy of the people over and over again are the ones who get the real scoops or the real engagement from the White House. The same, President Trump calls them the enemy of the people. It's an incongruency there. And then you have this new setup of like conservative influencers sitting in like the kids' daycare. It's like a Smalley daycare, except there's actually kids there, and they don't get the real scoops. And it's like two different worlds, and we're never going to break the control if we keep at it this way. Why do you think this problem persists? Whoever wants it.
Well, I think it's purely a function of social relationships, of when these people get in the Beltway and they're socializing and fraternizing with each other, and this unfortunately becomes their little bubble that they're in, and they don't see outside of it, whereas people down in Florida or Ohio or Idaho don't care about these relationships, and they don't care about the New York Times, where unfortunately conservatives are very sensitive. Even, we see where people go to a local restaurant and they get booed, or some Soros activists start throwing rotten fruit at them, or whatever happens. But I think power is exercised socially. And, I'll speak about my own life. I mean, unfortunately, once you get involved in politics, if you stand by your convictions, you're going to lose relationships, and you're going to damage relationships solely because the other person on the other side maybe can't wrap their head around it, that you might disagree with them or have a different opinion. So this happens, and unfortunately, we're human and people are sensitive to that. So I think that's something that we need to overcome.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Mike. It's a great question, by the way. Great question. As somebody that's been a statewide political candidate a couple of times now, when I was presented with the opportunity to have CNN come into the house, or our house, and sit down with my wife and I and interview us, I was already knowledgeable, even though I'd only been out of the Air Force 2 years, that there was a certain ideological bent to CNN and other and MSNBC outlets and those kind of things, to where I raised my eyebrows and I said, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" And then I immediately flipped back on myself when I was talking to my strategy guys, and I said, "But what I've been telling you is that I think my ideas are not partisan. The ideas that I ran on and Donald Trump won on, border security, energy independence, and stopping the endless war policies, are ideas that cross party lines. And for me, when I made the decision to go ahead and do it, I was like, well, it's increasing my audience, but I'm trying to reach this audience that isn't going to be on the side of the political party that I'm in, and I want to reach them. And I still, to this day, will take, if I get offered an opportunity, even on MSNBC, to do an interview, I will take that interview for that reason, knowing that they're going to do a hit piece on me 99.99% of the time. Same thing with the print press. That's almost always going to be a hit piece. They always use things that were created in my political campaigns, even to this day, 10 years later, in order to do that, to damage the message that I'm trying to send. But here's the kicker. Is I know that message, if it gets out, even in their venue, that some people are going to hear it and go, "These guys' narrative is really wrong about this guy," or about the message that so-and-so is speaking. And I think that drives a lot of the politicians that are actually in office, if I had to guess, make an educated guess about it.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, just real quick, you mentioned the White House still giving those exclusive. I think that's a great point. I don't think it's been brought up today. And a very recent example is, why were they talking to Vanity Fair?
Yeah.
Why couldn't they give that exclusive to an up-and-comer? And you used another way of saying it. I love Tom Wolfe, the deceased writer from Manhattan. He called it statospheres, and it was in a 1980 book about the astronauts. So what you were describing is a swamp statosphere, and we have to totally obliterate that. We need people who do not want to become a priest in that swamp statosphere. We need people who operate in different statospheres. So I think that again, it's a spiritual problem. I'm not talking, liturgy or the fine details of the Nicene Creed or anything, but it is a spiritual problem where I think they're worried about their legacy. They still believe that the legacy of their life and their life's work is going to be written by the New York Times. And that's one of the reasons why we release this book, is no matter what lies Hunter spews, no matter what lies Mike Schmidt puts out as Hunter's legacy, whatever Hunter's obit says in the New York Times, there's going to be this obituary in a way. So you need to convince these weak-kneed Republicans that, hey, your legacy is not going to be honored by the people you care about in the New York Times. And I think then they will stop caring about what is printed about them. But to make that effective, we also need a new prestige ecosystem of truth-telling publications to fill in that legacy gap, because everybody, I think, in politics wants to have a good legacy and think that what they did was righteous. And if they think the Washington Post is going to be the one writing that, they'll care that the Washington Post called me a Nazi, which is of course preposterous.
Yeah.
So I think it's the statosphere question.
Yeah, that's extraordinarily well said. And I'll just add to it, is the quickest way not to have a legacy is for political leaders to be worrying about what their legacy will be in the midst of a cold civil war that's happening in a country that's coming apart at the seams, in a political movement, let's be honest, over the last 50 years of the far left that has destroyed so much of our country and our institutions. The fact that anybody from the president on down can be thinking about like legacy in terms of total victory, which is so far away, it should just be beyond anyone's concern at this moment. We got to
hit what's in front of our face and start digging out of the mess we're in instead of worrying about what Vanity Fair or others may write or photograph us doing. I know you don't have that problem.
It was the photo shoot that really sent me over the edge.
Yeah, it's out of touch. It's certainly like, I'm not trying to knock. They're good people. I've been trying to do the best. It's a tough situation, but we got to call a spade a spade.
The only legacy they ought to be worried about is the legacy of the country that's free and prosperous for our children and grandchildren. That's the eye on the prize and the target that needs to be on the horizon for everybody.
This is a high stakes battle we find ourselves in. And for a lot of people who are associated with this group and Patriot Freedom Project, that's their independent, that's their freedom. Their lives are at stake. And it's not, legacy and political framing and who gets the fancy write up. And it's not whether we have a country or we don't and whether we're free people or not. So
250 years, yeah.
250 years in. And, the next 250 is not guaranteed.
Absolutely.
Of course not.
And so, gentlemen, thank you for being a part of that fight, for being the focus of that fight. Doug, you particularly, and Garrett, you've had your turn in the barrel as well. And
just civil. I've only faced a civil lawfare. Douglas has been in the belly of the beast. And I urge everybody, talk about primary sources, to go read the Second Circuit opinion on Douglas's case released last July. It was gorgeous. It was unanimous. It was a total beatdown of the EDNY.
Terrific. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Mackey. It's a pleasure to be here with our panelists today. I'm working with one of our panelists, Mrs. Cynthia Hughes, on the Weaponization Watch project by the Patriot Freedom Project. And we also have here, of course, Colonel Rob Maness and Garrett Ziegler as well. Thank you all for being here. We are going to be talking about a office of the DOJ called the EDNY. The Eastern District of New York is a district that comprises Brooklyn, Long Island, Staten Island, and Queens. And it's a little-known district. We hear a lot about the abuses by the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, which thankfully two great American patriots have done a lot to clean up that office, Ed Martin and Judge Janine. Another one we hear a lot about because they prosecute Wall Street is the SDNY, and this is one that we are focused on as well. But today we're talking about the EDNY, which has a long and illustrious history of political weaponization. We're going to hear about that today. So for those that don't know, in 2016, I posted a funny meme in Manhattan, notably not in the EDNY, saying that Hillary Clinton supporters could text their vote and avoid the line and stay home. Now, this was obviously a joke, but not to the EDNY. 4 years later and 7 days after Biden was inaugurated, the FBI came knocking at my door, the New York FBI, and I found out that I was being indicted in the EDNY for conspiracy against rights, a federal felony punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison, a $250,000 fine, because they said that I had conspired in DM group chats to trick people or steal their votes. So this case was brought in the EDNY, even though not a single defendant lived in the EDNY. Not a single defendant was in the EDNY when the supposed conspiracy happened. They said that, number one, that because I sent the tweet out and then I could conceive that it could be seen in the EDNY, well, under that theory of prosecution, I could be prosecuted in Alaska or Wyoming or Hawaii, anywhere in the country. Secondly, they said, well, the tweet went on the wires that go either under the water or over the bridge surrounding Manhattan, which those waters share jurisdiction with the EDNY. Ultimately, we fought venue in the case, but the question was never decided because I won the appeal, and the appellate court ruled that the EDNY didn't even bring evidence in my case to show that I ever was part of any conspiracy to steal anyone's vote. Not to mention there were no victims in the case. They couldn't find a single person who actually believed the meme. And they didn't have any evidence that the cooperating witness, the co-conspirator in the case, and I had ever coordinated on any of these memes or anything like that. So what does this go to show you? It goes to show you how the EDNY brings charges based on tenuous or non-existent evidence, using novel prosecutorial theories in my case, using a statute that is supposed to be used against people who conspire to injure, threaten, oppress, or intimidate Americans in the exercise of their rights. For instance, masked men chasing people down for voting and assaulting them, or worse, killing them. The statute actually contains a death penalty provision for if your conspiracy results in death. Fortunately, my mean didn't result in anyone dying, so I didn't face the death penalty. But this goes to show why are they targeting me? And we're going to hear about a whole litany of other cases. Well, this is a politicized office. It's a rogue office. They're not only doing the political bidding of the Democrat Party, but also they like flashy prosecutions that make their careers. They don't want to chase your common bad guy like an illegal immigrant selling drugs or whatever on the streets. They want to go after certain industries like finance, crypto, which we've seen time and time again, and they want to go after people like me who are political opponents of Donald Trump. They also went after Donald Trump's great friend Tom Barrack and claimed that he was acting as a FARA, he was violating FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, because he was doing basically normal business activities or normal diplomatic outreach. But once Trump left office, they indicted Tom Barrack. He fought the case and won at trial, was outright acquitted. And he was the chief of Trump's inauguration, I believe, his first inauguration. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to the panel and to first to Colonel Rob to talk about some of the history of the EDNY here and some of the illustrious actors who have come out of the EDNY.
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate that. You know, this coverage of this district in New York and the history behind it is critically important because one of the biggest damages that have occurred to this country over the last 7 years are political prosecutions by partisan political prosecutors against political opponents of those that are in elected office at the time. Guess where, if you had to find the root cause or the deep well of political partisan prosecutors and corruption, where would you go? The Eastern District of New York. And I'm proud to be part of this Weaponization Watch effort with Cynthia because a lot of the folks that we are trying to help and advocate for and get visibility on are being prosecuted by this very district in New York. Let me tell you about some of the people that have come out of this and what they've done to this country. Andrew Weissman. You remember that name, right? From the Mueller witch hunt, the Russian witch hunt against President Trump and his supporters, where they broke every rule and norm and ethics regulation by doing things like destroying all of their cell phones on that prosecution team. Once it found out that the report came out that there was no there, and they spent $20-something million doing it. It was a complete hoax. Andrew Weissman, don't ever forget that. He was the head of the criminal division in the Eastern District of New York. Jack Smith, currently in the news still, the rogue special prosecutor that went after President Trump and all of his supporters over the insurrection, the fake insurrection that was crafted completely by those inside the government and in the political hierarchy, in the party hierarchy of those in power. Jack Smith, and he's still at it today. Well, believe it or not, Jack was the head of public integrity in the Eastern District of New York. It's hard to say that without laughing. Because he's so ridiculous that he's been overturned by the Supreme Court by a vote of 9-0 before, because not even the leftists on the Supreme Court to support this creep that has zero integrity and will do whatever he can to politically hurt those in opposition to whoever he's working for. In this case, it was President Joe Biden. And then, of course, everybody knows the name of Loretta Lynch in the famous discussion on the ramp with former President Bill Clinton.
About the grandchildren.
About the grandchildren, right?
Told him.
Loretta Lynch came out of the Eastern District of New York as the U.S. Attorney to the Attorney General there. So if you want to go find the deep well of corruption and partisan political prosecutions and where they're created at, you probably ought to look at the EDNY first. But remember, the bottom line is this. These people have caused grave damage to the government of the United States, and most importantly, to the sovereigns, the citizens of the United States, because we can no longer count on equal justice before the law until the situation with people like this is rectified and they are held accountable to the maximum extent of the law.
Thank you, Colonel. And I want to add about Loretta Lynch. After Loretta Lynch left the EDNY, there was a prosecutor in Suffolk County, the district attorney's office, named Christopher McPartland. And he blew the whistle about this playing meeting, right? And the EDNY went after this guy after Loretta Lynch went to the U.S. attorney's office and made his life a complete living hell. They charged him with obstruction of justice, and then they unleashed a whole barrage of media leaks to the New York Times, the New York Post, etc. And he complained to the DOJ about these leaks and got nothing back from them. So it really makes you wonder what's going on in the EDNY and the sort of retaliation and the sort of bidding that they're doing of these actors. So thank you very much, Colonel. And I want to mention Cynthia is a warrior for a lot of defendants in the EDNY, myself included, but she also has a heart of gold, and she's really attuned to the personal stories and, importantly, the families and the effect that these cases have on families. And I could talk about that a lot, and my poor wife and son who had to go through it all. But I want to turn the floor over to Cynthia to discuss about the impact these weaponized prosecutions are having on people's lives and, importantly, their families.
Thank you, Doug. Colonel, that was amazing. Thank you. And I want to tell you, we don't call that an insurrection. We actually call it a fedsurrection, because that's what it was, right? Garrett, on January
Yeah, I mean, it was an insurrection. Nobody brought a gun. If you would have thought, that's a novel theory of the law.
Yeah. So, Doug, as you know, with January 6th, I became, a big advocate, and we focused, mainly on the family core, taking care of the wives and the children, trying to keep as much normalcy for these families as we possibly could. And it became just this monumental, organization and, collective effort with, a group of really great women that were caught up in the January 6th debacle. And so we've spent the last 4 years helping these families, just keeping them connected to one another and, helping them with their bills, their mortgage, their electric, making sure Christmas was happening, making sure Halloween was happening, making sure brand new shoes for back to school was happening. But, 5 years later, where are we, right? Where are we now? So what we learned is that before January 6th, we learned that, we had the warm up, right? We had the warm up. What happened in Michigan, Garrett?
Yeah.
And we call that's right. We call that a fed napping.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we had, the warm up in Michigan with the fed napping, Gretchen Whitmer, she requires attention. And so she really, went out there and created some serious attention for herself. She's a liar is what she is. But in any event, and then we had January 6th. You have a lot of families that are still broken from the Whitmer fed napping, men that are still languishing behind bars in a supermax prison with El Chapo. And then we have January 6th. And so now, what are we doing now, Doug, right? We have to, I don't say move on from January 6th, but we have to take what we've learned from the Whitmer fed napping, from the January 6th fedsurrection, and we have to apply it now, because we're hearing from so many people around the country who are victims of weaponization. And it may not be from what happened in Michigan. It may not be what happened here in DC on January 6th, but it's because of whatever's going on. And so I don't want to talk about specific families that, we're working with right now, that we're helping, who they are, because they're in the thick of it. But I'll say this, the damage that I've seen with the Whitmer families, definitely with the January 6th families, I'm seeing it now with just families that weren't caught up in a politically motivated episode, if you will. So, so we've created Weaponization Watch, and we're going to continue our humanitarian efforts because there's a big need for that. People need connection. People need to go to somebody who knows how they feel. Go to talk to somebody to say, well, you saw it today here, right? We connected all these different families with January 6 families, and you saw almost like this relief in some of the women that we saw here today, because they're just starting the journey and these other women have come through it. So we have to blow the lid off of weaponization, and you have to start somewhere. And I say we have to start at the EDNY. What the EDNY is doing, there needs to be a special prosecutor appointed to the EDNY. I have somebody in mind who I would like to see doing that job, but he wears enough hats. But his name is Ed Martin, and I think that Ed has such a spine and a backbone and compassion and love for the core family unit. That guy understands, and so we need a bright light to shine on EDNY and SDNY, because we're learning, Doug, they are breaking up families. They are threatening people. They are looking to be, they're overzealous, and they're trying to have a big win, like a big payday. And they're doing it at the expense of, tax-paying Americans, okay? People, maybe they support something in finance. People maybe support this president. People maybe they, supported, I don't know, America's mayor, right? Giuliani. Whatever the case, may be, the fact is we have to shine a light on what is going on in these very, very rogue jurisdictions and how it's impacting these families, how it's impacting children, Garrett, how it's impacting, a wife, men that are going away to prison for 10, 15, 20, 35 years, life in prison maybe. What happens to these little children? That is the biggest thing for me. Why do these jurisdictions like EDNY and SDNY have to have this big win? Why is it such a power trip for these people? Why do they want to take families and rip them apart when they don't have to do that? There needs to be somebody in EDNY right now, Garrett, Doug, Colonel, and somebody needs to shine a light over there, because it is, I thought January 6th was bad. No, I got to tell you, January 6th was its own animal, its own monster, whatever. What I'm learning about EDNY, being with Doug's family, being with Doug's baby, seeing this baby, thinking about if Doug was in prison right now, where that baby would be right now, where his beautiful wife would be. No, we have to put an end to this, and we have to shine a light on this, and we have to talk more about this. And I'll just say this last thing. There's 2 women sitting in a Brooklyn prison right now. Doug, you and I know who they are, okay? They're languishing behind bars. They've been there for quite a long time now, okay? Because of a bogus conspiracy charge. That conspiracy charge is so dangerous. Conspiracy is like taking spaghetti, throwing it against the wall, and hoping it will stick. And in the EDNY, it does stick, unfortunately. And if we don't get somebody in there, there's going to be 2 women that are going to be in prison for a very, very, very long time. And we can't have that. And so it takes people like myself and you, Colonel, and Garrett and Doug to stand up and speak out like this. Nobody else is doing it. Right. We hope President Trump sees this and hears this and does something and really pays attention to this. We're going to continue to fight for these families.
Absolutely. And these are not hardened criminals. These are family men. And their children, with small children and wives, and they never expected anything like this. It's not like they chose a life of crime.
Yeah.
And all the consequences that come with it. These are vague charges, novel charges, unsubstantiated charges. And like you said, they introduce the conspiracy element, and they can shift their prosecutorial theory as the new evidence comes in, or their evidence is discredited or disqualified. They're going to shift their theory to make it fit the vague charge. So I want to shift over to Garrett really quickly, because Garrett is, good at looking at these kind of things with a an analytical, strategic mind and practical steps. That what can you do with an organization, the federal government, with 2.2 million employees? How in the world are you ever going to get to the bottom of it without breaking the whole thing so that you can't get anything done? So, Garrett, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, so the rudimentary education is that 94 districts are in this federal system, right? So there's county courts in this country, municipal courts, but the federal court system is broke up into 94 pieces of pie. Now there's 93 U.S. attorneys. I think Guam and the Mariana Islands share a U.S. attorney. So the EDNY is one of those 94 cutouts. It just so happens that it's one of the most poisonous. And each of these 94 districts will have its own org chart, its own levers of authority, its own FBI agents that will do dirty deeds for them. I know that Douglas, this Megan Reese figure, has worked on multiple ridiculous cases. So these prosecutors become buddy-buddy with certain FBI agents who will submit complaints under oath that are false and get a magistrate judge to sign off on it. So the practical step is you have to have visibility into this entire operation. And the only way you do that is you have to be able to map out these offices and account for every single person with any amount of hard or soft power within the office. So this may sound boring or tedious to some, but you have to get a grip on how the office functions. Right now, if you held a gun to somebody's head and made them tell you everything they knew about the EDNY, they may know who the active U.S. attorney is, some active cases, but they probably couldn't tell you and take you through how the sausage is made. We have to, on the right, and by right, I simply mean this, people who value the Constitution as amended. That's what I define as the right. People who care about constitutional form of government. You have to become interested in how the sausage is made. We have to become sausage connoisseurs in a way. And that's a bad joke, but that's what you have to be. The sausage is made by filling out an org chart. The org chart should be electronic. And whoever comes in, they have to audit every single position. Every single position should be justified for its existence. If you don't do that, they are like termites. There are going to be some people in there that burrow themselves in that still have authority that you haven't nixed yet. And we owe it to the Republican form of government that the executive branch is actually that the elected leader is in charge of the executive branch. Because right now, the elected person, elected by 80 million Americans, at least probably, he doesn't control the entire executive branch. He may control portions of it. I have no doubt that he was aware of what was going on with Maduro, but he needs to be aware of how charging decisions are made in the EDNY because his citizens and voters are getting crushed. And like you said, they're overzealous. They have a desire to win at all costs. And if you're not an independent multimillionaire, or if you don't have people like Cynthia organizing these sorts of institutions, you will get crushed. And so I call on anybody who's interested in the details to bring this up, that we need to know every single, we pay their salary. Mm-hmm. We need to know every single Fed who's at the EDNY.
Right. Personnel is policy, like they say. To illustrate your point, the prosecutor in charge of my case was the election crimes specialist for 2020 and 2024. Do you think he was chasing after ballot stuffing?
And he's still there, I bet.
He's still there, and is he going to be the election crime specialist in 2028? So this is something we're going to look at. I've got, fortunately, some lawyers retained. We're going to look at this EDNY, this gentleman. And as you brought
his name?
Eric Paulson.
Paulson.
Okay. And there's only 10 of these prosecutors that are appointed, elections gurus or czars, whatever you want to call them, across the country. They're chasing down memes on the internet, apparently.
The meme was hilarious for the record.
It was funny.
Some levity is absolutely just
absolutely, and to everybody except for the prosecutors of the jury. And secondly, you mentioned Megan Reese. It's a strange one. She was hired in 2014. How did she go from the Washington field office to the New York field office, working on all these politicized cases, accused of being part of a team that was tampering with evidence, and now the rumor is she's moved to Boston. So it's a strange thing. We need to get to the heart of all this. So.
Can I give you a contemporary example?
Yeah, really quickly.
We mapped out 145 federal officials who touched the Biden investigation. 145 of them. So this can be done. We used mind mapping tools like MindMaster. We have to get creative, and there are tools out there to where you don't have to keep this stuff in your head. You should, publicize these org charts. It lets the feds know that they're being watched.
Absolutely.
And
That-
Doug, I'm sorry, Doug. I know you want to kick us out, but it's the same thing with the Whitmer Fednapping. It's all the same players.
Yeah.
Colonel from Michigan that came to D.C. right before January 6th.
That's right.
D'Antuono, whatever the heck
He finally left, right? What's he
Yeah.
doing? Microsoft, right?
Playing dominoes or something. I don't know. In any event, but it's like it's just repeat behavior.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party, I think we can all agree, is a dangerous, what I'm calling a terrorist organization.
I would call them satanic.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you.
A few of them are satanic.
That's a conversation for another day, Doug and Colonel. But they need the Democratic. This is not a Democratic Party anymore. It's just not. And we need eyes on not only the Democratic Party but EDMY and SDMY. But EDMY is really out of control.
Maybe we can have a webpage on Weaponization Watch. Just all of the sins and abuses of the EDMY.
Let's do it.
Weaponizationwatch.org/EDMY.
And if you want to support all of the conversations you're hearing today, you want to support these women that are languishing behind bars, these other families who are facing a very big crisis here soon, and January 6ers who are still in limbo, go to patriotfreedomproject.com or please go to weaponizationwatch.com and help us continue this fight.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Lieutenant Commander Tom Caldwell, U.S. Navy retired, and I was a political prisoner in the United States of America. We're now at the anniversary of January 6th. My wife Sharon and I celebrated our first Christmas of freedom in 5 years. The world was told by the Biden administration that I was the commander of the Oath Keepers, and I was the mastermind of January 6th attack on the Capitol, that I led an armed force of men into that building. None of that was true, of course, and the DOJ and the FBI knew it was untrue, even as they issued those fantasies in press releases. They knew of my innocence even as the FBI SWAT team rolled up on our farm in Virginia, attacked our home and nearly murdered my wife on the front porch of our house as she stood there in full compliance to their orders to come out in nothing but a nightshirt in the pre-dawn hours of the 19th of January, 2021. I never went into the Capitol on January 6th. In fact, Sharon and I were together peacefully all day long that day. Never saw any violence, never committed any violence, never broke any laws. Again, the DOJ knew all of this, but they did not care. And so began an odyssey for my wife and me to include persecution, wrongful imprisonment, torture in prison, violation of our rights, a 10.5-week jury trial in a kangaroo court in Washington, D.C., and untold numbers of indignities as they tried to break us physically, and yes, I called that book The Mouths of the Wicked. It is a true January 6th story of corruption, persecution, survival, and victory. It's available now online at bookbaby.com and puffinpublishers.com. I wrote this book for a couple of reasons. One was so that there would be an historical record of the prosecutorial malfeasance thrown at me and so many others caught up in this web of January 6th deceit and chicanery. The other reason that I wrote this book and felt moved to do so was to glorify the living God. You see, when truth and innocence count for nothing, you better have another plan. For my wife Sharon and me, it wasn't a backup plan, it was the first plan. Prayer. Prayer to our Father. She and I battled for over 4 years, nearly 5 years day for day, against the corruption of the Biden administration, the lawfare brought by a bunch of corrupt prosecutors, questionable judiciary members, and a bunch of Keystone Cop wannabe law enforcement people out of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We fought for a long, long time. I hope that you do read the book. Book people call it a first-person adventure narrative told as one friend speaking to another. And I will tell you this, I bring in the receipts. Maybe it's part of that Navy training burning through. When I tell you about the things that they did in those secret tribunals, you better believe I have the government's own documentation to prove it. And it's there in those heartfelt written pages and the endnotes which follow. I hope that if you do read it, and it will take courage and commitment for you to get this book and read this book, I hope that you're engaged and enraged and maybe even encouraged. Because the kinds of things that happened to Sharon and I happen to hundreds and hundreds of our fellow citizens. They don't have a voice yet. Some of them don't have the ability to tell the terror that they suffered. Some of the things I wrote about, my wife said, you can't put that in the book. Some people will say that's crazy, that couldn't happen in America. And other stuff was so painful and so raw that it would permanently damage anybody that read it. You'd never be able to unread it. I laugh now because we have won. We have won. This Christmas, as Sharon and I spent it alone on our empty farm, which is sort of a ridiculous term since we have no farm equipment anymore. There are no animals there except the wild ones that walk through. We talked about the salvation and the wonder and the grace of a loving God who pulled us through. I have met our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and you can meet him too. I'm nobody's spokesperson, but I will tell you that even as the media spews the twaddle of how January 6th is a stain on the history of our country, the real stain is the fact that the Constitution could be shredded and that people's constitutional rights, civil rights, and human rights could be trampled upon with such glee by the Biden administration. Many of the miscreants who did this are still lurking in the shadows. I said at the beginning, I'm not really used to talking on camera, talking with you as I am now. But I will close by saying, I really hope that we never lose sight of the principles that we've lived by in this country. The Constitution is not something to be rewritten and modernized, as some have called for. The deep state and the counter state are real, and they are bipartisan. And we need to be involved, and we need to stay in prayer, because the kind of things that happened to me and my Sharon and to so many of our other citizens will happen again if we do nothing. And now, if I may, I'll paraphrase a statement from the great General MacArthur, who at the end of his public life said, this old soldier, well, he's just going to fade away. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Blaine Eiler. Thank you to Cynthia, Doug, John, Colonel Manis, and all the others involved with the Weaponization Watch and the incredible work that's being done here. I've gone through one of the toughest times of my life over the past 5 years, nearly 5 years. But my story's not all that unique, as I've found. While the events of my case might be unique to me, what I found in hearing the stories of others is that the pattern is all too familiar. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a father, a husband from Dallas, Texas. I was indicted in the Eastern District of New York under an alleged bribery scheme involving some business partners of mine. At worst, this amounted to potentially a conflict of interest, which, by the way, is not a federal crime. And in order to even believe that we had a conflict of interest, you had to ignore really, really important elements of timing of intent. I had two partners in a main business that we had formed for the purpose of serving better food to kids, usually in schools. In parallel, one of my partners, Michael, knew Eric, who was responsible for the purchasing of food as well as transportation and athletics in the New York City public school system. Eric and Michael knew each other from their days at a prior company where Michael worked, one of the largest food companies. Eric was appointed by a Republican mayor to bring innovation and change to the city, better food for kids, and this disrupted a lot of the status quo with the bureaucrats in the city that didn't like this approach that Eric was taking. So Eric was looking to leave that position and move back to the private sector. He and Michael joined forces and spoke about a beef import company that they wanted to start. And they brought my partner Brian and me in, and we talked about forming a business to do that. Separately and in parallel, Michael, Brian, and I formed a different business that I mentioned, which was established to manufacture better food for kids. And we all know that the food in schools is not great, and it was our mission to improve that. About a year into this process, our business selling food to schools was growing, but we had spent a lot of time and money with this separate beef company to try and get beef imported into the country, and it just wasn't working. And so we decided to separate from that business. Of course, that business had expenses and things that it spent money on to grow the business. At issue in total in this case was about $96,000. Of that, about 80% were actual legal fees, and the rest were travel expenses that the business incurred to pursue this beef import business. Now, you know, the government said that initially that this was a sham company. Ultimately, they conceded, as they had to, that no, it was a real business. We were actually trying to get the business off the ground, yet they construed the entire business as a quid pro quo or a conspiracy to bribe the school official, Eric, in exchange for favorable things that happened to our other business that was completely unrelated, and in many cases, Eric had absolutely nothing to do with. After a 4-week trial that you see permeating all these other cases, the judge did actually express serious doubt in our case. He didn't believe that, he was actually led to believe that the government was going to present a case where a bunch of callous businessmen paid off a school official to serve inferior school food to kids in schools. And that just didn't happen. Now, of course, there was an issue with some of our food, and the government focused on this in the trial. They spent a lot of time talking about some food safety issues with our chicken products, namely that they had bones in them. And of course, they did. However, they were manufactured for us by a third party, and as soon as we had any idea that there was an issue with these products, we instructed the schools to not serve them. We did exactly what we should have done to make sure that no kids were harmed. Nonetheless, the government portrayed us as callous businessmen, as I said, who would prefer to bribe a school official in order to put inferior school products in schools for kids. And so our case is on appeal now. We're very fortunate to be out on appeal and continue to fight this fight. We feel very good about it. And we raise a few issues in the appeal, which we think are very compelling. Of course, we didn't bribe anybody to get food into schools, nor did we bribe them to put product back into schools after they had been held after the bones. And there's some major timing issues that you really have to ignore hard truths in order to believe the government's theory. And secondly, we talk about how the government showed numerous food safety issues, pictures of bloody bones and things that had nothing to do with the actual case. And of course, if you're a parent, right, a typical juror in Brooklyn is probably a parent of somebody in school in New York City, or who themselves went to school in New York City. And we are fighting on those grounds as well. And so I'm proud to be part of this group. It's been great to get to know everyone here. I really appreciate all the work that everyone's doing. We're hopeful for our appeal and look forward to seeing it play out.
Hello, my name is Thomas Ranieri, and I'm an attorney. I am a civil attorney, civil litigator, and I represent some J6 plaintiffs in their suit against the United States government for violation of their constitutional rights, resulting from their wrongful arrest and imprisonment in the aftermath of the January 6th insurrection, or however you would like to put it. We are bringing a suit which is sounded in a Bivens action, which is in essence a federal cause of action which allows people to sue government agents for actions that violate their constitutional rights while acting under the color of law. By which I mean, while pretending to be, say for instance, an FBI agent or a federal prosecutor, they're actually engaging as a private tort, violating the constitutional rights, and in this case, the constitutional rights of my clients. In this particular case, the prosecutors, the Justice Department, not only used spurious legal theories which explode the concept of things like conspiracy by making my clients responsible for third-party actions that occurred on January 6th. In essence, meaning that because other people did things wrong on January 6th, they imputed those things wrong that they did to my clients, despite not having any control or communications with the people who did anything wrong. Using these theories, they put my clients in jail. They put them in pre-conviction solitary confinement, meaning, excuse me, meaning that my clients were put into solitary confinement despite not having any violent tendencies before they were even convicted of their crime. And that is the least of the problems. They also embedded confidential informants in among the trial team for the defense and tapped privileged communications between my clients and their attorneys. And these things were sent back to the prosecutorial team, which in essence gave them a leg up over my clients' ability to defend themselves. Instead of going through the laundry list, and there is a laundry list of things that the government did wrong, suffice it to say that the complaint is in the public record and anyone may look it up. But the fact of the matter is that these things normally go unaddressed. Constitutional rights violations, as you've heard a lot today, wrongful actions by both enforcement officers as well as prosecutors, abuse of process, and the manipulation of the legal system in order to achieve positive benefits, perceived positive benefits for the prosecution and the government, despite those things being manifestly against both due process and the concept of justice itself. Now, I could go on and on about this, and I would like to, but I'm running out of time already. And so what I'd like to do is just point out the fact that it's not merely that these people are put in jail when they oughtn't be put in jail, or put through the terrible experience of being prosecuted and going through year-long criminal prosecutions. But despite the pardons and the commutations that President Trump gave, their lives are ruined. They can't make money. They can't provide for their families. They're, not only do they lose years of their lives, but they can't even build their lives back up because their entire existences have been defamed and destroyed by the government. When you do that, in the normal course of life, if an individual does that, you are expected to pay restitution for the destruction of someone's life. If you make it so they can't work because you've hurt them, or you've injured them, or you've broken a contract with them, you're expected to pay them back for that violation. And in this instance, the United States government took away my clients' lives, not just a few years, their entire lives. They cannot make money, they can't get jobs. Everyone thinks that they're these evil insurrectionists. And so now they're in a situation where they're isolated, socially isolated. They can't even have normal social interactions with people because they're frightened. There are radicals out there, radical leftists out there who want to hurt them, who will threaten them despite their being commuted, despite them being pardoned. So first, I'd like to say two things. First, the United States government, not just for my clients, but for all the wrongfully accused January 6 people, should be paid, the January 6 people should be paid restitution for the damage done to them by the overzealous prosecutors and FBI that were working underneath the Biden Department of Justice, and their obvious political prosecution of people they disagreed with, which is unacceptable in a Republican form of government. We should be allowed to disagree, and if you have power, you should exercise it responsibly so that you are not hurting people just because you disagree with their position. And the second thing is, and I will end with this, that the commutations are a great start, and everyone is very grateful to President Trump for commuting sentences. But a lot of the people that were prosecuted by the Department of Justice were wrongfully prosecuted, as it says in the pardon and commutation order that he signed upon his inauguration. And the fact is that these people should all be given pardons, because that pardon helps their case against the United States government to get the restitution that they deserve as a result of the violation of their constitutional rights. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to me. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this stream. And I want to say thank you to Cynthia for having me. And I hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.
Good evening. I'm Rob Maness, a retired colonel from the United States Air Force. Served for over 32 years in my enlisted and officer career, and have commanded at 3 levels, at least twice in combat. And I'm very proud to be part of the Weaponization Watch team that's being led up by the Patriot Freedom Project, Cynthia Hughes and John Schlafly of Eagle Forum. I'm here because there is a weaponization aspect to the Department of War's institutions. And it goes back to what we've seen with the treatment of folks from the unlawful COVID vaccine order, and that 8,000 plus individuals that were forced out of the military because they had either a religious exemption that they wanted to get past, a decision based on their religion, or a medical decision because it was an emergency use authorization medication that's not supposed to be allowed to be forced on anybody, let alone our military individuals. Well, that weaponization, believe it or not, folks, continues. I want to brief you up real quickly on the case of Brigadier General Chris Sage. I interviewed him on my show on December 29th because he was forced to retire, even though he had been promoted to Major General, the 2nd star level, but had been removed from the list by the Biden autopin system. He was forced to retire on the 31st of December 2025 and is now out of the Air Force. But it was because 4 years ago, he made good decisions as a commander in combat in Iraq to take care of his people, but they were in opposition to the standard and somewhat wacky COVID policies, like having to wear a mask out on the flight line in the desert heat under airplanes that have engines running, and you can literally see the heat coming off of the aircraft. That was just dumb for that policy, and General Sage removed that policy when he took command of that unit. Folks that had tested positive for COVID were put in a tent surrounded by the same type of razor wire that you see at maximum security prisons. And when he saw that, he gave an order to remove that razor wire and went in and visited with those folks that had tested positive for COVID, because every human being should be treated humanely. And it was inhumane to treat these folks as prisoners, and that's exactly what he told his people. But the Inspector General system was weaponized against Chris back in those days, and he got a Inspector General complaint, series of complaints against him that had to be investigated. And unfortunately, the political appointees and the investigator, who never even came to the site where these incidents occurred, did his entire investigation from his computer in the Pentagon, even though General Sage was stationed overseas, substantiated these claims when they shouldn't have. Well, the President and Secretary Hegseth directed that the department give reinstatement opportunities for folks that were affected by the unlawful COVID vaccine order, and General Sage applied to the Air Force Board of Military Records Correction, the BCMR, And the board actually agreed with him that the IG complaint investigation was wrongly substantiated and there really were no facts that supported it, so they overturned it. They also said that he should get his second star back that he had made, that, remember, the Biden auto pin had removed him from the list so he couldn't pin it on. That's what drove his forced retirement. But here's the kicker, folks. There are thousands of younger and more junior men and women that have been adversely affected by these policies and this type of activity beyond General Sage, and he's just the symbol. He's the face of it because of his rank and his status. We need to make sure we're keeping those kinds of people or getting them back in the service, and here's why. Because they're the ones that demonstrated what's called moral courage. The courage of their convictions. When they knew that something was wrong, they stood up and they did the right thing and they made the right decision. Especially somebody like a commander in combat, making the right decision to take care of his people so that they could get their mission completed and go out and find and kill America's enemies, as we asked them to do on our behalf. That's the kind of men and women we want in charge of our military. So the Inspector General system is still being weaponized, and we need to get a Trump-appointed Inspector General in the Department of War and staff there so that we can fix that. The second thing that's going on, I just want to spend a couple minutes about it, is that the largest change in the Uniform Code of Military Justice was made in 2022, and it took the commanders, the unit commanders, out of the loop of the decision process on charging and those kinds of things for major crimes like rape, sexual assault, murder. And unfortunately, that is the most vast change that we've ever seen, but it gives the corporal's veto, so to speak, to somebody junior if they say, well, so-and-so touched me inappropriately with an unsubstantiated allegation, but that reform, taking the commanders that are the non-lawyers out of the system that make those kinds of decisions, stands in opposition to the lawyers, which we've already seen a lot of the military lawyers fired by Secretary Hegseth, and vice versa. A senior person could do the same thing to a junior person in that type of reform, and unfortunately it's already in place. So I'm calling on the Secretary of War to, sir, we've got to do a review of the UCMJ system to make sure that those folks that are operating in that system are doing it appropriately and ethically, because we have this challenge where commanders have been removed from this process and we need to get them put back in place, because that's what's best for good order and discipline, and that's what military law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, is all about. You can't have the lawyers be able to make all the decisions, because the lawyers' objectives, by and large, may be different than the commander's objectives. The attorneys, the prosecutors, they want to win, but the commander may have a person that he or she has the ability to save that person so they can have a productive and long career serving our country and accomplishing the missions that we give them, instead of being convicted unnecessarily and, in a lot of cases, with very, very little to no evidence, just because of the system reforms that have been put in place since 2022. That's about where we're at from a weaponization perspective of the institutions in the Department of War. And I'll leave you with this. The COVID vaccine is much more damaging than the American people realize. Over 95% of America's armed forces took the COVID vaccine, and the physical adverse reactions still haven't been fully discovered, and they're not being fully acknowledged either in the Department of War or the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we need to address that issue. Thank you very much.
Well, as we say, that's a wrap, right? We thank you for tuning in. We thank our panelists. We hope that you learned a lot today. We hope that you continue to support the mission of Patriot Freedom Project and Weaponization Watch. Please follow myself, Cynthia Hughes, at RealPFP on X. Please follow Doug Mackey. Please follow Colonel Rob Maness. And stay tuned for future events coming up. We have a lot on the horizon. We have a lot of work we're working on, a lot of cases to blow the lid off of, and many J6ers who still continue to need help. We're still supporting a lot of these families. We're still helping these children. We're still helping these families, come back from the brink of near devastation. And we can't do it without you. We couldn't do it without you all this time. And so we really hope that you'll continue to support our efforts, pay attention to what we're doing, and support what's going to be happening in the future here. Learn more about the cases out of EDNY that we're working on, how we're helping and supporting Colonel Manis, with the weaponization that goes on in the military. And just pray for everybody. Pray for everybody who is facing weaponization, who is struggling. We have a lot of families that we're helping out of the EDNY that are just beginning the process of what can only be described as a nightmare. And they need prayer. And so to all you prayer warriors, please pray. Pray for these families. And we do have a message, I don't think it was echoed enough throughout the day today. 1 year ago on January 20th, we watched our president, the greatest president in American history, President Donald Trump, historically sign a mass pardon and let these people, more than 500 people that were languishing behind bars, people that were still sitting in pretrial, that hadn't gone to trial, people that were sentenced to an egregious amount of time for nothing. And we're just so grateful to you, President Trump, for restoring families, bringing families back together, putting families, back intact. But there's more to do, sir, and we hope that you're paying attention, and we hope that you will continue to speak out against weaponization and help us speak out against weaponization. And we support you, President Trump, and we always will. You're a loyal president, and in turn, we are loyal to you. And we need your help, though. We really need your help to focus on the EDNY and the SDNY. So please, if you're watching and you're hearing this, get us a special prosecutor, and let's take down EDNY once and for all and expose the corruption that is so deeply rooted there. These families need your support, President Trump. Please, I hope you hear this plea. So with that, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting, and we'll see you again very soon.